We all know that Mecca is one of the holiest cities in Islam, a place of pilgrimage and devotion. But what was life really like there in the 7th century? Imagine a bustling desert city where the most sacred symbol of faith, the Kaaba, stood at the center, drawing pilgrims from all corners of the Arabian Peninsula. Yet, beyond its religious significance, Mecca was a city of extreme contrasts: luxury and poverty, power and oppression. In today's video, we'll talk about what life was truly like in Mecca during this time, its culture, its people, and the tensions that set the stage for a world-changing transformation. So, let's not waste any time, and let's begin. Chapter 1. Introduction to Mecca. The desert stretched endlessly, its golden sands shimmering beneath the scorching sun. In the heart of the Arabian Peninsula, surrounded by harsh and unforgiving terrain, stood the city of Mecca. It was a place where commerce, culture, and faith converged, making it one of the most revered cities in the region. The site of the Kaaba, the sacred black cube at the city's center, was an enduring symbol of devotion that drew countless pilgrims each year. Mecca, with its long and storied past, was a city of contrasts: the sacred and the profane, the rich and the poor, the powerful and the humble, all coexisting within its walls. For centuries, Mecca had been a bustling hub of trade, where merchants gathered from distant corners of Arabia and beyond. Its strategic location along vital trade routes made it a melting pot of cultures, languages, and religions. Traders from Yemen, Syria, and Iraq arrived with spices, incense, and fine textiles to sell in its crowded markets. These merchants were more than businessmen. They were custodians of the city's spirit. For Mecca was not merely a trading post. It was home to the Kaaba, the most sacred sanctuary in Arabia. The Kaaba had long been a focal point of worship for tribes across the peninsula. Pilgrims came from every direction, some traveling on foot for weeks to perform ancient rites passed down through generations. The city's importance as a spiritual center was unmatched. Yet Mecca was also a city of deep contradictions. On one hand, stood the wealthy merchants, living in ornate homes in the heart of the city. They were the elite, the powerful, and the influential. The Quraysh tribe, rulers of Mecca, controlled both its commerce and its religion. They maintained the Kaaba and oversaw the pilgrimages, ensuring their dominance spread far and wide. Beyond the city's marble courtyards, however, were the poor, the laborers, and the slaves. These were the people who carried the heavy loads, built the walls, and kept the city alive. They lived in squalor, their labor essential, but their lives overlooked. Though they sustained Mecca's prosperity, they were treated as little more than tools, unheard, unseen, and easily forgotten. The divisions were everywhere. The Quraysh and their allies lived in luxury, hosting lavish feasts where wine and music flowed freely. In stark contrast, the poor endured long days of labor and restless nights of hunger. Mecca's wealth was vast, but so was its inequality. Amid this disparity, the Kaaba stood as both a symbol of unity and a reminder of division. To many, it was a place of peace and prayer, a sacred link between humanity and the divine. To others, it had become a symbol of status and wealth, its sanctity overshadowed by profit. Pilgrimage filled the coffers of the elite, and faith became entangled with power. Yet beneath the glittering markets and holy rituals, something deeper stirred, a growing tension between the old and the new, between polytheism and a rising belief in one God. In the crowded streets, the call to prayer echoed through the air, mingling with the sounds of trade and conversation. The faithful gathered at the Kaaba seeking forgiveness and peace, while the powerful gathered there to maintain control over the city's spiritual and economic heart. Among the tribes, the Quraysh remained supreme, wealthy, proud, and deeply protective of their traditions. Their control of the Kaaba gave them both prestige and profit, ensuring their rule endured. But Mecca's destiny was not shaped by the elite alone. Beyond their palaces lived those whose voices had long been silenced: the poor, the servants, and the seekers of truth. Their struggles would soon merge with a message that promised liberation and justice, challenging the old order and reshaping the city's future. And in the midst of the bustling streets, a single voice began to rise. It was not the voice of a ruler or a merchant, but of a man known for his honesty and humility. His message spoke of one God, of equality, and of compassion. It called the people of Mecca to abandon their idols and unite in faith. That voice belonged to Muhammad, the prophet whose words would echo far beyond the desert, transforming Mecca from a city of idols into the heart of a new faith, and forever changing the course of human history. Chapter 2. The arrival of a new message. The streets of Mecca were alive with sound, the haggling of merchants, the clink of coins, and the chants of pilgrims circling the Kaaba. Amid the noise walked a quiet man with a calm determination that few understood. Muhammad, born into the Quraysh tribe, had grown up witnessing the deep divide between wealth and poverty, power and oppression. Yet he stood apart from the rest. Known for his honesty, humility, and integrity, he was called Al-Amin, the trustworthy. Those who knew him, from traders to servants, admired his character and sincerity. By his mid-30s, Muhammad had grown increasingly troubled by Mecca's moral decay. The exploitation of the poor, the greed of the wealthy, and the worship of idols weighed heavily on his heart. Seeking peace and clarity, he often withdrew from the city to the surrounding mountains. In a small cave on Mount Hira, he would spend nights in solitude, reflecting on the world and yearning for guidance. It was there, in the stillness of one such night, that his life and the world changed forever. As he meditated, a powerful presence filled the cave. The angel Gabriel, appeared before him, commanding, "Read in the name of your Lord who created." The words struck like lightning, shaking him to the core. In that moment, Muhammad became the chosen messenger of a new revelation, a call to abandon idolatry and worship the one true God. Overwhelmed and trembling, he fled the cave and returned to his wife Khadijah. Fearing for his sanity, he confided in her all that had occurred. But Khadijah, a woman of great wisdom and faith, believed him. She had always known his sincerity, and she stood by him unwaveringly. Together, they sought counsel from her cousin, Waraka ibn Nawfal, a learned Christian, who confirmed that the voice Muhammad had heard was indeed divine. More revelations followed, each one strengthening his conviction. They spoke of mercy, justice, and the unity of God. Humanity, he was told, had strayed from the truth, worshipping idols instead of their Creator, hoarding wealth while neglecting the poor. Muhammad's mission was to restore the balance, to call people back to righteousness, compassion, and faith in one God, Allah. At first, he shared the message quietly. Khadijah was the first to believe, followed by his young cousin Ali, his loyal friend Abu Bakr, and a few others who trusted him deeply. They formed the small but steadfast community of early Muslims. Their gatherings were humble, often held in secret, yet filled with a sense of divine purpose. But as word spread, so did hostility. The Quraysh viewed Muhammad's teachings as a direct threat to their power. The idea of one God undermined their role as guardians of the Kaaba and jeopardized the profitable pilgrimages that sustained Mecca's economy. They mocked him, calling him a dreamer, a madman, a liar. Behind the insults lay fear, the fear that their authority and wealth were slipping away. When insults failed, they turned to persecution. Muhammad and his followers were ostracized, boycotted, and ridiculed. Merchants refused to trade with them. Families disowned their believing kin. Yet the prophet remained steadfast, proclaiming the truth, even when alone in the crowded streets. His message was not just for Mecca, he said, but for all of humanity. The Quraysh leaders tried to bargain with him, offering riches and power if he would abandon his message. But he refused, declaring, "Even if you place the sun in my right hand and the moon in my left, I would not forsake this mission." His words echoed through Mecca, a defiance born not of pride, but of faith. As persecution intensified, many Muslims fled to Abyssinia, where a Christian king offered them refuge. Despite hardship, the new faith continued to grow, carried in whispers and secret prayers. Oppressed and the poor found hope in its message. The humble found dignity in its truth. Through every trial, Muhammad remained patient and resolute. His compassion softened hearts, and his integrity drew even his enemies to respect him. What had begun as a solitary voice in a mountain cave was becoming a movement, one that would soon shake the very foundations of Meccan society. And so, the message continued to spread, quietly, courageously, and with unshakable conviction. The dawn of Islam had begun. Chapter 3. The struggle intensifies. As Muhammad's message spread through Mecca, the Quraysh leaders grew increasingly desperate. Their mockery and ridicule had failed. The new faith continued to gain followers. In response, they resorted to harsher measures. The believers were persecuted, beaten, and shunned, yet their faith did not waver. No amount of cruelty could silence their conviction in the oneness of God. Unable to sway Muhammad's resolve, the Quraysh turned to deceit and propaganda. They accused him of sorcery and madness, calling him a liar who sought to divide families and destroy Mecca's ancient traditions. They warned the people that Muhammad's teachings threatened their gods and their way of life. But the prophet continued his mission with calm determination. His words, full of compassion and truth, reached hearts that wealth and power could not. Among those who suffered most was Bilal, an Ethiopian slave who had embraced Islam. His master, enraged by his conversion, dragged him through the burning streets of Mecca and placed heavy stones upon his chest, demanding that he renounce his faith. But Bilal refused. With each blow, he repeated a single word, Ahad, Ahad, one, proclaiming the unity of God. His endurance became a symbol of strength for all believers. Others faced similar trials. Sumaya, one of the first Muslim women, was tortured and killed for refusing to deny her faith, becoming Islam's first martyr. Her courage inspired countless others. The Quraysh hoped these brutal acts would crush the new religion, but instead, the suffering only deepened the believers' resolve. As persecution intensified, the Quraysh sought to tempt Muhammad directly. They offered him riches, leadership, and influence if he would abandon his preaching. Yet, his response was unwavering. Even if you place the sun in my right hand and the moon in my left, I would not abandon this message. For him, the call to truth was greater than any earthly reward. For the growing Muslim community, life in Mecca became unbearable. They were boycotted, insulted, and excluded from society. Families were torn apart, and merchants refused to trade with them. Faced with mounting oppression, some sought refuge in Abyssinia, across the Red Sea. The Christian king, known for his justice, welcomed them and granted protection. This migration, known as the First Hijrah, was a turning point. It showed the believers steadfastness and their willingness to sacrifice everything for their faith. Those who remained in Mecca endured the full wrath of the Quraysh. Their homes were raided, their livelihoods destroyed, yet they stood firm. The revelations continued to guide them, urging patience, perseverance, and trust in God. The Quran spoke of justice and mercy, calling for the protection of the weak and the establishment of moral order. Each new verse strengthened the believer's spirit and deepened their understanding of their purpose. In their frustration, the Quraysh imposed an economic and social boycott against Muhammad's entire clan, the Banu Hashim. For nearly 3 years, they were isolated in a narrow valley on the outskirts of Mecca, cut off from trade and supplies. Hunger and hardship plagued them, but their unity grew stronger. Despite the pain, Muhammad continued to preach, comforting his followers with words of faith and hope. Eventually, the boycott collapsed under the weight of public sympathy and divine intervention. Yet the trials had taken a toll. Many of the Prophet's closest supporters, including his beloved wife Khadijah and his uncle Abu Talib, passed away soon after. Their loss brought deep sorrow, marking one of the most difficult periods in Muhammad's life. Still, the message of Islam endured. No persecution, no bribe, and no loss could extinguish its light. The early Muslims, bound by faith and brotherhood, continued to spread the word quietly but firmly. The Quraysh could not understand how a message so simple could hold such power, but its strength lay not in wealth or force, but in truth. And so, the struggle continued. The oppression of Mecca only deepened the believers' resolve. Their hearts were unshaken, their spirits unbroken. The seeds of faith had taken root in the desert sands, and no storm could uproot them. Chapter 4. The Battle for Survival. Persecution in Mecca had reached its peak. Each day, the Quraysh intensified their efforts to extinguish the growing light of Islam. As Muhammad's message spread, their grip on the city began to weaken. Desperate to preserve their power, they turned to every weapon available: force, deception, and propaganda to destroy the movement that threatened their dominance. Yet the early Muslims stood firm. They had endured years of torment and isolation, but their hearts remained anchored in faith. Their belief in the oneness of God and in Muhammad's mission gave them strength that no sword could break. Every insult, every wound, only deepened their resolve. Then came a revelation that changed everything: permission to fight back. For years, the Muslims had been commanded to bear their suffering with patience and to avoid violence. But as the oppression worsened, God revealed, "Fight those who fight you, but do not transgress. Indeed, Allah does not love the transgressors." Quran 2:190. This marked a turning point. The believers were no longer bound to endure in silence. They could now defend their faith and community. But the challenge was immense. The Muslims were few, poorly equipped, and facing one of Arabia's most powerful tribes. Their first true test would come at a place called Badr. A Quraysh caravan, rich with trade goods, was returning from Syria. The Muslims saw an opportunity to strike a blow against the Quraysh economy. A small band, led by Hamza ibn Abd al-Muttalib, set out to intercept it. The Quraysh, learning of the plan, marched out in full force to protect their wealth. What began as a skirmish became the first great battle in Islamic history. At Badr, the Muslims stood outnumbered 3-1, yet their spirit was unbroken. They fought with faith as their shield, certain that divine help was near. Against all odds, they triumphed. The Quraysh army was routed, many of its leaders slain. The victory at Badr was not merely military, it was spiritual. It proved that faith, courage, and unity could overcome tyranny and fear. The triumph came at a price. Among the fallen was Ubaida ibn al-Harith, one of Muhammad's earliest and most loyal followers. Yet his sacrifice only deepened the community's devotion. News of Badr spread across Arabia, inspiring many to embrace Islam. For the Quraysh, however, the defeat was an unbearable humiliation. Their pride shattered, they swore vengeance. In Medina, the Muslims began to strengthen alliances. Some of the Jewish tribes of the city, long neutral, began to take interest in Muhammad's leadership. A few offered support, others watched warily from a distance. The young Muslim state was growing, but so too were the threats around it. The Quraysh soon gathered a new army, 3,000 strong, to crush the Muslims once and for all. Muhammad mustered only 700 fighters, their weapons few, but their faith unwavering. The armies met at the foot of Mount Uhud, just outside Medina. At first, victory seemed near. The Muslims fought with discipline and courage, forcing the Quraysh into retreat. But a critical mistake changed everything. A group of archers, ordered to guard the mountain pass, abandoned their posts to collect spoils. Seizing the moment, the Quraysh cavalry swept around and attacked from behind. Chaos erupted. The Muslims were driven back. Many fell, and the Prophet himself was wounded. The battlefield of Uhud, once a place of triumph, became a scene of heartbreak. Yet even in defeat, the believer's spirit endured. God revealed, "Do not lose heart, and do not grieve, for you will be superior if you are true believers." Quran 3:139. Though the losses were heavy, the lesson was greater. The Muslims learned discipline, patience, and reliance on divine guidance. The Quraysh, despite their apparent victory, failed to destroy the community they so feared. Through blood and sacrifice, the believers discovered that survival itself was victory. Their unity, born of struggle, could not be undone. Muhammad's leadership, tempered by loss and resilience, guided them through the storm. The battles of Badr and Uhud became more than moments of war. They were tests of faith, shaping a nation that would soon rise from persecution to power. Chapter 5: The Path of Patience and Perseverance. After the trials of Uhud, the Muslims of Medina found themselves in a time of reflection and renewal. The wounds of battle ran deep, scars not only upon their bodies, but within their hearts. They had suffered loss, but not defeat. Through pain and grief, they discovered the strength of faith that neither sword nor sorrow could destroy. The Quraysh, emboldened by their partial victory, were not content. Their ambition was to crush Islam entirely, to erase its message from Arabia. Yet the Muslims, under the guidance of Muhammad, faced this rising threat, not with fear, but with patience and unity. Their prophet reminded them, "So be patient. Indeed, the promise of Allah is truth." Quran 30:60. The days that followed were not easy. The desert's harshness mirrored the uncertainty in Medina. Resources were scarce, and tensions simmered among the city's tribes. The Jewish clans maintained a wary distance, their alliances fragile and divided. Yet amid this fragile peace, the Muslims held firm to prayer, drawing strength from revelation and from the example of their prophet, whose patience became their compass. Muhammad continually urged his followers toward steadfastness. He reminded them that victory was not always measured on the battlefield, but in the soul's endurance through trial. His call was not one of anger, but of calm strength, to hold fast to faith when ease seemed impossible. It was during this period that one of the most profound moments in Islamic history occurred: the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. What appeared, at first glance, to be a setback would prove a divine triumph in disguise. The Muslims had set out for Mecca, intending to perform the pilgrimage. They came in peace, bearing no arms, yet the Quraysh barred them from entering. Tense negotiations followed, resulting in a treaty that many Muslims found difficult to accept. The terms seemed unfavorable. The Muslims would return to Medina without completing their pilgrimage and would have to wait another year to return. Any Meccan who fled to Medina was to be sent back, while any Muslim who left Medina for Mecca would not be returned. To many, this felt like humiliation. But Muhammad saw beyond the surface. He knew that peace, even on difficult terms, would open doors that war could not. He accepted the treaty, declaring it a victory of patience. Not long after, revelation confirmed his insight. "Indeed, we have given you, O Muhammad, a clear conquest." Quran 48:1. Under the treaty, the Quraysh and the Muslims agreed to a 10-year truce. For the first time, the Muslims could live without constant threat of attack. The peace allowed them to focus on dawah, the invitation to faith. Traders, travelers, and tribes who had once feared aligning with the Muslims now came to Medina to learn about Islam. In the span of a few short years, the number of believers grew faster than it ever had through battle. But the peace did not last. 2 years after the treaty, a Quraysh-allied tribe violated its terms by attacking one allied with the Muslims. It was a betrayal that demanded justice. Muhammad gathered his followers, now 10,000 strong, and set out toward Mecca. This time, it would not be a battle of swords, but a march of hearts. As the Muslims advanced, the Quraysh realized resistance was futile. Fear gave way to surrender. Muhammad entered Mecca not as a conqueror seeking vengeance, but as a servant of God restoring peace. He declared amnesty for his former enemies. The idols within the Kaaba were destroyed, and the sanctuary returned to the worship of one God alone. The conquest of Mecca, achieved without bloodshed, was the ultimate testament to patience, perseverance, and divine wisdom. Through endurance, not aggression, Islam triumphed. The city that had once mocked and persecuted its prophet now became the beating heart of the faith. From that day forward, the message of Islam spread swiftly across Arabia. Tribes once divided by war united under a single creed. Through patience and trust in Allah's promise, the Muslims transform from a persecuted minority into a nation guided by faith and justice. The lesson of Hudaybiyah echoed through generations. Victory does not always roar. It often arrives in silence, through restraint, faith, and the unshakable certainty that the promise of God is never broken. Chapter 6. The Conquest of Mecca. The Treaty of Hudaybiyah had been a turning point in the history of Islam. What once seemed a concession had become a divine strategy. It granted the Muslims the time and peace they needed to strengthen their faith, spread their message, and build alliances across Arabia. Within 2 short years, the influence of Islam had reached corners of the peninsula that Mecca's power could no longer touch. But the Quraysh, bound by pride and the weight of their old ways, could not uphold their promise of peace. A tribe allied with them attacked one loyal to the Muslims, violating the terms of the treaty. This betrayal could not go unanswered. The Prophet Muhammad, who had endured persecution, exile, and endless hostility with patience, now knew the time had come to act. He called upon his followers to prepare for an expedition to Mecca, not one of vengeance, but of justice. This march would not be for conquest alone. It would be a pilgrimage of faith, a restoration of the sacred city to its rightful purpose, the worship of Allah. Under the Prophet's command, a great army of 10,000 set out from Medina. Their ranks were disciplined, their hearts firm, their intentions pure. As they approached Mecca, the Prophet ordered that no harm be done to those who laid down their arms. There would be no looting, no cruelty, and no forced conversions. The Muslims were not coming to destroy. They were coming to purify. When word of the approaching army reached Mecca, the Quraysh were struck with fear. They had seen the rise of Islam and knew resistance was futile. Abu Sufyan, one of Mecca's most influential leaders and a longtime opponent of Islam, went out to meet Muhammad. After a conversation that revealed the Prophet's mercy and dignity, Abu Sufyan embraced Islam. Through him, the people of Mecca came to realize that the Prophet sought not their destruction, but their salvation. As the Muslim army entered Mecca, they did so without arrogance or pride. The Prophet Muhammad rode humbly upon his camel, his head bowed in gratitude. Around him, the companions walked in reverent silence. There were no banners of conquest, no cries of triumph, only the quiet dignity of faith fulfilled. Upon entering the Kaaba, the Prophet ordered the destruction of the idols that filled its sacred walls. With his own hand, he touched the images of false gods and recited, "Truth has come, and falsehood has vanished. Indeed, falsehood is bound to perish. Quran 17:81. The sound of breaking stone echoed through Mecca as the house of Allah was purified for the worship of the one true God. Then, standing before the people who had once exiled and mocked him, the Prophet addressed them. His words were neither harsh nor vengeful. "O people of Quraysh," he said, "what do you think I will do to you today?" They answered, "You are a noble brother, the son of a noble brother." The Prophet's reply echoed through history, "Go, for you are free." This act of forgiveness stunned Mecca. Those who had once raised their swords against him now lowered their heads in shame and awe. The Prophet's mercy conquered hearts more powerfully than any army could have conquered cities. It was this compassion, not conquest, that defined his victory. The conquest of Mecca was not merely a political triumph. It was a moral and spiritual victory. It marked the end of idolatry in Arabia and the dawn of a new era of unity and faith. The Kaaba, cleansed of its idols, once again became the center of monotheism. The city that had once rejected the messenger now stood as the heart of Islam. In the months that followed, delegations from across Arabia came to Mecca, pledging allegiance and embracing Islam. The Prophet Muhammad continued to teach humility, justice, and compassion, reminding the believers that true victory lies in righteousness, not power. The conquest of Mecca was the fulfillment of divine promise, a victory achieved not through bloodshed, but through patience, perseverance, and unwavering faith in Allah. What began as exile ended in triumph, and the city that once symbolized opposition now stood as a testament to the mercy and truth of Islam. Chapter 7. The Farewell Pilgrimage. After the conquest of Mecca, the Prophet Muhammad had established a new era for Islam. The Arabian Peninsula was united under the banner of monotheism, and the message of Allah was spreading rapidly. With the Kaaba purified and the Quraysh accepting Islam, the Prophet's mission seemed complete. Yet, one final monumental event remained: the farewell pilgrimage. In the year 10 AH, 632 CE, having secured the allegiance of nearly all Arabian tribes, Muhammad prepared for his last Hajj. Tens of thousands of Muslims gathered, eager to perform the sacred rites under his guidance. This pilgrimage was unlike any other. It would serve as both a personal act of devotion and a final opportunity to impart his timeless guidance. As he entered Mecca, the Prophet led the pilgrims through the rituals with humility and reverence. Every action and word carried significance. He reminded them of the fundamental principles of Islam: the oneness of Allah, justice, compassion, and the moral responsibilities of every believer. His presence and teachings united the people not merely as worshipers, but as a community committed to righteousness. At the plain of Arafat, during the pinnacle of the pilgrimage, the Prophet delivered his farewell sermon. Addressing the assembled masses, he said, "O people, listen to my words, for I may not be with you again in this place. Your blood, your property, and your honor are sacred to one another. As this day, this month, and this city are sacred. Return trusts to their rightful owners, and do not wrong yourselves. Remember that you will meet your Lord, who will hold you accountable for your deeds." He continued, emphasizing equality and moral responsibility. All mankind descends from Adam. An Arab has no superiority over a non-Arab, nor a non-Arab over an Arab. A white has no superiority over a black, nor a black over a white, except through tafawidi and good deeds. Through these words, the Prophet underscored the universality of Islam and the equality of all human beings, irrespective of race, ethnicity, or social status. He reminded his followers that faith and morality, not lineage or wealth, define true honor. The Prophet also highlighted the enduring guidance for the Muslim community. I leave among you two precious things, the Book of Allah and my Sunnah. Hold fast to both, and you will never go astray. These words cemented the Quran and its teachings as the eternal foundations of the Muslim community, providing clarity and direction for generations to come. As the sermon concluded, he asked the congregation, "Have I conveyed the message?" They responded in unison, "Yes, you have conveyed the message." He then raised his hands to the heavens. "O Allah, bear witness, I have conveyed the message." The farewell pilgrimage was more than a physical journey. It was the spiritual culmination of Muhammad's life work. It reinforced justice, equality, compassion, and moral integrity, guiding Muslims toward unity and righteousness. After the pilgrimage, the Prophet returned to Medina, where a sense of finality settled over the community. The mission he began in Mecca over 2 decades earlier had reached its earthly fulfillment. Yet, his life on earth was nearing its end. A few months later, Muhammad fell ill. Though weakened, he continued to advise his companions, urging steadfastness in faith and care for one another. On the 12th of Rabi al-Awwal, 1110 AH, he passed away, leaving the Muslim community in mourning. Yet his legacy endured. The Quran remained, and his teachings continued to inspire. The farewell pilgrimage and the Prophet's final words serve as a timeless reminder. Islam is a path of faith, justice, mercy, and unity. The principles he embodied and conveyed continue to shape the lives of millions, echoing across centuries as a testament to patience, perseverance, and unwavering devotion to Allah. Chapter 8. The Passing of the Prophet. The Prophet Muhammad had always been a figure of strength and guidance for the Muslim community. His leadership had unified the tribes of Arabia under the banner of Islam, and his wisdom had been a beacon for believers. As the year 11 AH began, the Muslim community still felt the glow of his farewell pilgrimage. His sermon at Arafat had left a lasting mark on the hearts of his followers, emphasizing unity, equality, and adherence to the Quran and Sunnah. Yet, as weeks turned into months, a profound sense of change settled over Medina. The Prophet, peace, once vigorous and resolute, fell seriously ill. What began as mild fever and discomfort soon became severe. His companions, those who had stood by him from the early days of revelation, gathered anxiously, tending to him with care. Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali, and others remained close, ensuring his comfort and attending to his needs. Despite his weakening condition, the Prophet continued to offer guidance. He reminded the community of the importance of prayer, charity, compassion, and justice. The people of Medina, hearts heavy with concern, realized the possibility of losing the leader who had guided them through battles, conquests, and the establishment of the Islamic State. As his illness progressed, Muhammad summoned his companions to impart his final counsel. With great effort, he spoke of the enduring foundations of Islam. "I leave you two precious things, the Book of Allah and my Sunnah. If you hold fast to both, you will never go astray." He urged unity among the believers, care for the poor and oppressed, and steadfastness in righteousness. His voice, though weak, carried the weight of a lifetime of wisdom. In his final moments, he called for his wife, Aisha, to sit by his side. He spoke softly to her. "Take care of the believers, be kind to them, and guide them to the straight path. I leave you in the hands of Allah." Aisha would later preserve the Prophet's teachings, playing a crucial role in ensuring that his legacy endured. On the 12th of Rabi al-Awwal, 11 AH, the Prophet Muhammad passed away. The city of Medina mourned collectively. The very air seemed heavy with grief. His companions were stricken. Some wept openly, while others stood in stunned silence. Ali, his cousin and son-in-law, collapsed under the weight of his sorrow, and Abu Bakr, his closest confidant, composed himself to address the community. He reminded the people of the central truth of Islam. "O people, if anyone worships Muhammad, then know that Muhammad is dead. But if anyone worships Allah, know that Allah is alive and never dies." The words steadied the believers' hearts, affirming that the Prophet's passing did not end the message of Islam. His mission had been fulfilled, and now it was the responsibility of the community to carry it forward. The death of Muhammad marked the end of an era, yet his teachings, character, and legacy endured. The Quran, as the eternal word of Allah, remained a guide for generations. The Sunnah, his practices and example, provided a blueprint for living a righteous life. Guided by his wisdom, the companions would expand the reach of Islam, spreading its principles to every corner of the world. Though the Muslims grieved deeply, they drew strength from his life and message. Muhammad had united a fractured land, established a moral and spiritual framework, and left a legacy that would resonate across time. His passing was sorrowful, yet it also marked the beginning of a new chapter in Islamic history, one in which his teachings would inspire millions, shaping civilizations for centuries to come. The Prophet Muhammad had departed from the world, but his light continued to shine, guiding the faithful with the eternal truths of Islam. Chapter 9. The Farewell and the Legacy. The death of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was not only a personal loss to his family and companions, but a monumental event that shook the very foundations of the early Muslim community. The loss of their leader, the man who had been both a spiritual and political guide, left the people of Medina in deep grief. Yet, the Prophet's passing was also a moment of profound clarity, a moment that would define the future of the Islamic world. For the companions, this was a moment of great responsibility. They had witnessed the Prophet's strength, wisdom, and tireless efforts to spread the message of Islam. Now, they were tasked with carrying his legacy forward. Their challenge was not only to continue his mission, but also to preserve the unity of the community and ensure that the teachings of Islam remained a guiding light. In the immediate aftermath of the Prophet's death, Medina was enveloped in mourning. The Muslim community felt the weight of uncertainty. unsure what the future would hold. Amidst this sorrow, however, some stood firm, determined to ensure that Islam would remain strong and unified. Abu Bakr, the closest companion of the Prophet and his trusted advisor, stepped forward to take charge. Having been a constant presence by the Prophet's side, Abu Bakr was the natural choice to lead the community, though his leadership was not without challenges. Upon the Prophet's passing, the companions gathered in the Saqifa, a building in Medina, to discuss succession. Opinions differed. Some believed Ali, the Prophet's cousin and son-in-law, was the rightful successor, while others, including Abu Bakr, argued that leadership should be based on merit and experience rather than family ties. By consensus, Abu Bakr was chosen as the first caliph. Known for his humility and wisdom, he was not driven by ambition, but by a desire to serve the Muslim community. In his first address, he said, "O people, I have been appointed as your leader, but I am not the best among you. If I do well, then help me. If I make a mistake, correct me. Obey me as long as I obey Allah and His Messenger. But if I disobey Allah and His Messenger, then do not obey me." These words reflected his humility and accountability, setting a precedent for leadership based on service rather than authority. Abu Bakr's first challenge as caliph was the outbreak of apostasy. Several tribes refused to pay zakat and renounced Islam, threatening the unity the Prophet had established. With the support of the companions, Abu Bakr launched military campaigns to restore order. Among the key leaders was Khalid ibn al-Walid, whose skill in battle helped bring rebellious tribes back into the fold, ensuring the fledgling Islamic State remained intact. During his caliphate, Abu Bakr also oversaw the compilation of the Quran. Many who had memorized the Quran, known as Hufaz, had begun to pass away in battles, and there was a risk that the revelations could be lost. Abu Bakr tasked Zayd ibn Thabit with compiling the Quran into a single, cohesive written text, preserving it for future generations. Abu Bakr's leadership established a model of governance rooted in justice, humility, and service. He was neither a monarch nor a prophet, but a servant of the community, dedicated to upholding Islam and carrying out the will of Allah. This model would influence Islamic leadership for centuries to come. After serving as caliph for just over 2 years, Abu Bakr's health declined. Before his passing, he appointed Umar ibn al-Khattab, another close companion of the Prophet, as his successor, ensuring a smooth transition. Abu Bakr passed away in 13 AH, leaving behind a legacy of unity, wisdom, and dedication. His brief reign solidified the Muslim community and laid the groundwork for the expansion of Islam across Arabia and beyond. The companions and the people of Medina mourned deeply, but the principles Abu Bakr upheld, justice, accountability, and devotion to Islam, ensured that the Prophet's mission would continue. The legacy of both the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and Abu Bakr as his first caliph would endure, guiding generations of Muslims and shaping the course of Islamic history for centuries to come. Chapter 10: The expansion of the Caliphate and the role of Umar ibn al-Khattab. The passing of Abu Bakr marked the end of an era and the beginning of a new chapter in Islamic leadership. Umar ibn al-Khattab, chosen as the second caliph, would emerge as one of the most pivotal figures in Islamic history. His leadership not only consolidated the unity of the Muslim Ummah, but also laid the foundation for the unprecedented expansion of the Islamic State. Umar was a man of immense strength, both physically and mentally. Renowned for his courage, deep sense of justice, and unwavering commitment to Islam, he contrasted with Abu Bakr's gentle wisdom through his firm and decisive nature. Umar's leadership was bold and ambitious, driven by a vision of a strong and unified Muslim community. His first task as caliph was to maintain the unity of the Muslim state. The early Islamic state faced enormous challenges: internal divisions among tribes and external threats from powerful neighbors. Umar recognized that the survival of the Ummah depended on decisive and just leadership. One of the major undertakings during Umar's caliphate was the expansion of the Islamic State. The Arab forces, having secured Arabia under Abu Bakr, now looked beyond its borders. Umar understood that the expansion of Islam was not merely territorial. It was a mission to spread Allah's message and uphold justice in the conquered lands. The first major campaign under Umar's leadership targeted the Sasanian Empire in Persia. Despite the Sassanids' formidable armies, Umar's strategic brilliance led the Muslims to victory, culminating in the decisive Battle of Qadisiyah in 636 CE. This marked the beginning of the Sassanid Empire's decline and opened the way for Islam to spread across Persia. Following Persia, Umar turned his attention to the Byzantine Empire, controlling much of the eastern Mediterranean, including Syria, Egypt, and North Africa. Under his guidance, Muslim forces won pivotal battles, such as the Battle of Yarmouk in 636 CE, leading to the collapse of Byzantine control over the Levant. With each victory, the Islamic State grew in size, influence, and cultural impact. Umar's governance emphasized justice and tolerance. Conquered peoples were allowed to practice their own religions, provided they accepted Muslim rule and paid the jizya. This policy was revolutionary in an era of forced conversions and persecution. He established a legal system ensuring that the rights of Muslims and non-Muslims were respected equally, enforcing laws without favoritism. Among Umar's lasting contributions was the establishment of the Islamic calendar in 638 CE, based on the lunar cycle, beginning with the Hijra, the Prophet Muhammad's migration from Mecca to Medina. He also created administrative divisions across the empire, appointing governors to oversee justice, tax collection, and the welfare of the people. Umar founded the Bayt al-Mal, the first Islamic treasury, to manage state finances, including zakat and khums. This institution ensured that wealth was distributed equitably, providing for the poor and needy while supporting state functions. Despite his military and administrative responsibilities, Umar remained a man of deep spiritual insight. Known for his piety, humility, and devotion to Allah, he sought guidance in prayer and reflection, emphasizing justice, compassion, and moral integrity in leadership. Challenges arose during his reign, including resistance to reforms and opposition to his strict policies. Yet Umar remained steadfast, prioritizing justice, religious tolerance, and the unity of the Ummah. Umar's leadership ended in 644 CE when he was assassinated by a Persian slave named Abu Lulu. His death was a profound loss to the Muslim community, but his legacy endured. Under his rule, the Islamic State had expanded across Persia, the Levant, Egypt, and North Africa. His governance, policies, and strategic vision transformed Islam from a regional power into a global force, laying the foundation for centuries of growth and influence. Umar ibn al-Khattab is remembered as a caliph whose leadership combined strength, justice, piety, and vision. His era reshaped the Islamic world, ensuring that the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, would continue to flourish in a united and thriving ummah. Chapter 11: The Rise of the Umayyad Dynasty and the Transformation of the Caliphate. The assassination of Umar ibn al-Khattab left a leadership void in the rapidly expanding Islamic State. While Umar had extended the Muslim empire across Persia, the Levant, Egypt, and North Africa, the question of succession loomed large. The issue was not merely leadership. It concerned the direction and future of the Caliphate itself. After Umar's death in 644 CE, Uthman ibn Affan, a companion of the Prophet Muhammad and a member of the influential Umayyad clan, became the third caliph. Uthman's rise marked the beginning of a new era, the era of the Umayyad dynasty. Known for his wealth, piety, and generosity, Uthman had been a successful merchant and a trusted member of the early Muslim community. His caliphate, however, would be defined by both accomplishments and controversy. Under Uthman, the Islamic State continued to expand. Muslim armies advanced against the Byzantine Empire and the remaining Sasanian territories in Persia, adding new provinces to the growing caliphate. One of Uthman's most enduring achievements was the standardization of the Quran. By commissioning the creation of a single unified manuscript, the Uthmanic Codex, he ensured that the Quran was preserved for future generations. Despite these successes, Uthman faced growing discontent. His appointment of relatives from the Umayyad clan to key positions led to accusations of nepotism and favoritism. Many felt that power was being concentrated within his family, alienating prominent figures among the Ansar, the Prophet's early supporters in Medina, and the Muhajirun, the immigrants from Mecca. Tensions escalated further due to perceptions of unequal wealth distribution. The rapid expansion of the Caliphate had brought immense riches, but the common people often saw little benefit while elites accumulated wealth. By 656 CE, discontent boiled over. Protests erupted across the empire, with crowds demanding Uthman's removal. The caliph sought military support, but failed to quell the unrest. Eventually, rebels besieged Uthman's residence in Medina, and after days of pressure, he was assassinated. His death plunged the Muslim world into turmoil, leaving the caliphate without clear leadership. Following Uthman's assassination, Ali ibn Abi Talib, the Prophet's cousin and son-in-law, was chosen as the fourth caliph. His ascension marked a new chapter, characterized by internal strife. One of his immediate challenges was addressing the grievances of Uthman's supporters, including prominent figures like Aisha, Talha, and Zubair, who demanded justice for the slain caliph. This tension led to the Battle of the Camel in 656 CE, where Ali's forces clashed with those seeking retribution. Although victorious, Ali's triumph did not heal the divisions, and factionalism deepened. The rise of the Umayyad dynasty under Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan further intensified the divide. As governor of Syria and a relative of Uthman, Muawiyah refused to pledge allegiance to Ali, insisting that leadership be restored to Uthman's family. This dispute culminated in the Battle of Siffin in 657 CE. An inconclusive and bloody confrontation, resolved only through arbitration. Yet the schism within the Muslim community persisted. The conflict between Ali and Muawiyah eventually led to the first fitna, the civil war of Islam. Ali's assassination in 661 CE ended the Rashidun Caliphate and ushered in the Umayyad dynasty. Muawiyah established himself as the first Umayyad caliph, transforming the caliphate into a hereditary monarchy. Under the Umayyads, the Islamic empire expanded to its greatest territorial extent, from Spain to India. While the Umayyads consolidated military and political power, their rule faced ongoing opposition, especially from supporters of Ali and early followers of the Prophet. Nonetheless, they established centralized governance, strengthened the army, and created administrative structures that would shape Islamic civilization. The rise of the Umayyad dynasty and the divisions of this period laid the foundation for centuries of political and religious challenges. The schism between Sunni and Shia Muslims, rooted in disputes over leadership, became a defining feature of Islamic history, influencing politics, society, and religious life across the Muslim world for generations to come. Chapter 12. The establishment of the Umayyad dynasty and the growth of Islamic culture. With the establishment of the Umayyad dynasty under Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan in 661 CE, the Islamic world entered a new era. The Umayyads consolidated power and transformed the Caliphate into a dynastic state, shaping the political, cultural, and intellectual trajectory of the empire. Their reign was marked by territorial expansion, administrative innovation, and cultural integration, but also by internal dissent and religious divisions. Under the Umayyads, the Islamic empire reached unprecedented dimensions. From North Africa to the Iberian Peninsula, across Persia, Central Asia, and even toward India, the Caliphate became one of the largest empires in history. By 711 CE, Muslim forces had largely conquered the Iberian Peninsula, while Eastern campaigns extended influence into Central Asia. These expansions brought not only land, but also a diverse range of peoples, languages, and traditions under Umayyad rule. Managing such a vast empire required an effective administrative structure. The Umayyads established a centralized bureaucracy, appointing governors to oversee provinces and enforce the Caliphate's authority. This system allowed them to maintain control over distant territories, collect taxes efficiently, and implement policies that strengthened the cohesion of the state. Despite these achievements, the Umayyads faced significant internal opposition. Early supporters of the Prophet Muhammad and the Rashidun caliphs often resented the Umayyads' dynastic approach, seeing it as a concentration of power within one family. Factions loyal to Ali, especially in Kufa and Basra, resisted Umayyad authority, giving rise to tensions that would define the Sunni-Shia divide. The Shiites maintained that leadership should remain with the family of Ali, while the Umayyads emphasized dynastic continuity and political consolidation. This conflict deeply influenced Islamic politics for centuries. Beyond politics, the Umayyads made lasting contributions to culture and intellectual life. The empire became a vibrant melting pot of Arab, Persian, Byzantine, and local traditions. They absorbed and adapted elements from conquered cultures, creating a unique synthesis that influenced administration, art, and society. One of the most enduring symbols of Umayyad cultural achievement is the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, completed in 691 CE. Its intricate mosaics and calligraphy reflect a fusion of Byzantine, Persian, and Arab artistry, establishing a template for Islamic architecture that would inspire generations. The Umayyads also promoted learning and scholarship. Their courts attracted scholars from across the empire, both Muslim and non-Muslim, fostering advancements in astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and philosophy. By patronizing intellectual pursuits, the Umayyads laid the groundwork for the later flourishing of the Islamic Golden Age. Yet the Umayyad Caliphate faced ongoing challenges. Internal revolts, regional uprisings, and discontent with the dynastic nature of their rule persisted throughout their reign. Opposition came from those who believed the caliphate should remain more inclusive, honoring the early principles of the Rashidun era. By 750 CE, the Abbasid family, descendants of the Prophet's uncle, successfully overthrew the Umayyads in a decisive revolution. The Abbasids promised greater inclusivity and garnered support from Shiite and anti-Umayyad factions, ushering in a new phase of Islamic governance. Despite their fall, the Umayyads left an enduring legacy. They transformed the caliphate into a centralized state capable of managing vast and diverse territories. Their policies, cultural achievements, and administrative innovations laid foundations for later Islamic empires. The artistic and architectural contributions of the Umayyads, especially the Dome of the Rock, set standards for Islamic aesthetics, while their promotion of learning prepared the intellectual groundwork for the Islamic Golden Age. The Abbasid Revolution marked the end of the Umayyad dynasty's political dominance, but the cultural, administrative, and intellectual advancements initiated under their rule continued to influence the Islamic world. By establishing centralized governance, patronizing scholarship, and fostering a synthesis of cultures, the Umayyads ensured that the foundations of the Islamic Empire were both enduring and adaptable, shaping the trajectory of Islamic civilization for generations to come. Chapter 13: The Abbasid Dynasty and the Golden Age of Islam. With the fall of the Umayyad dynasty in 750 CE, the Abbasid family rose to power, marking a new era in Islamic history. The Abbasid dynasty would come to symbolize a golden age for the Islamic world, one defined by cultural flourishing, scientific progress, and intellectual achievements. While the Umayyads had focused on military conquest and territorial expansion, the Abbasids prioritized creating a more inclusive and diverse society, where learning, trade, and culture could thrive alongside governance. The Abbasid Revolution was not merely a political shift. It represented a fundamental transformation in leadership and governance. The Abbasids, claiming descent from the Prophet Muhammad's uncle, Abbas, promised to restore a more egalitarian and just society. They rejected the dynastic rule of the Umayyads, which many viewed as an unjust concentration of power, and sought to establish a caliphate that included the various ethnic and religious groups that constituted the empire. Their vision emphasized merit, scholarship, and community engagement, rather than the accumulation of power within a single family. The early Abbasid Caliphate was marked by stability, economic prosperity, and cultural vibrancy. The capital was moved from Damascus to Baghdad, a city that would become the heart of the Islamic world. Baghdad's strategic location, at the crossroads of trade routes connecting Europe, Asia, and Africa, made it an ideal center for commerce, culture, and intellectual exchange. Under the Abbasids, Baghdad grew into a thriving metropolis, home to scholars, merchants, poets, and artisans from across the Muslim world and beyond, creating a cosmopolitan environment unmatched in the medieval world. A defining feature of Abbasid rule was their patronage of learning and scholarship. The caliphs, especially Harun al-Rashid, r. 786-809 CE, and his son al-Mamun, r. 813-833 CE, actively supported the translation movement. Greek, Persian, and Indian texts were translated into Arabic, preserving the knowledge of ancient civilizations while expanding intellectual horizons. These translations were crucial in developing fields such as astronomy, medicine, mathematics, and philosophy, and they laid the foundation for the Islamic Golden Age, influencing generations of scholars across the Muslim world. Baghdad became a central hub for intellectual activity. The House of Wisdom, established by al-Mamun in the early 9th century, functioned as a library, research institute, and translation center. Scholars there translated texts from Greek, Syriac, Persian, and Sanskrit into Arabic, and made groundbreaking contributions to mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. Figures like al-Khwarizmi, who developed algebra, al-Razi, a pioneering physician, and Ibn al-Haytham, a revolutionary scientist in optics, exemplify the remarkable advancements achieved during this period. The Abbasids also nurtured literature, philosophy, and the arts. Arabic poetry and prose flourished, with figures such as Abu Nuwas and al-Mutanabi, creating works celebrated for their beauty and depth. Philosophers like al-Farabi, Avicenna, and al-Ghazali bridged Greek and Islamic thought, furthering philosophical inquiry and contributing to global intellectual traditions. Baghdad's position along major trade routes facilitated cultural exchange, allowing ideas, art, and technology from China, India, and Europe to merge with Islamic civilization, resulting in a vibrant and diverse cultural tapestry. Despite their achievements, the Abbasids faced challenges. The empire's vast size and diverse population made governance difficult, leading to regional revolts and the rise of local dynasties. By the 10th century, caliphs in Baghdad had become largely symbolic rulers, with real power held by provincial governors and military leaders. However, the decline of political authority did not halt intellectual and cultural growth. The translation movement, scientific discoveries, literature, and philosophy continued to flourish, influencing not only the Muslim world but also Europe. Latin translations of Abbasid works played a key role in the European Renaissance, impacting thinkers like Thomas Aquinas and Roger Bacon. Even after the political decline, new centers of learning emerged in cities such as Cairo, Granada, and Istanbul. Scholars built upon Abbasid achievements, advancing mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. The legacy of the Abbasids, with their emphasis on learning, cultural exchange, and intellectual diversity, continued to shape the Islamic world for centuries. Although the Abbasid dynasty eventually lost political control, its cultural and intellectual contributions remain one of the defining characteristics of the era. The Abbasid Golden Age represents a high point in Islamic history, a period in which the Islamic world became a beacon of knowledge, learning, and cultural exchange, leaving a lasting and indelible mark on human civilization. Chapter 14. The Crusades and their impact on the Islamic world. The Crusades, a series of military expeditions launched by European Christians, between the 11th and 13th centuries stand as one of the most pivotal events in Islamic history, initially aimed at reclaiming Jerusalem and other holy sites from Muslim control. The campaigns left a lasting imprint on both Christian and Islamic civilizations. For Muslims, the Crusades were a direct challenge to their political and religious authority, while for Europeans, they were an opportunity to expand influence in the Mediterranean and the Near East. The First Crusade began in 1096, following a call to arms from Pope Urban II. He sought to unite Christian Europe in a holy war against Muslims who controlled Jerusalem, a city sacred to Christians, Jews, and Muslims alike. The Pope was also motivated by a desire to reassert European dominance over the Eastern Mediterranean and reclaim territory lost to Muslim forces over previous centuries. At the time, the Seljuk Turks dominated the Near East. They had pushed back the Byzantine Empire and controlled large parts of Anatolia and Syria, threatening Christian lands while consolidating power within the Islamic world. However, the Seljuks were fragmented, making them vulnerable to external threats. Tens of thousands of crusaders journeyed from Western Europe to the Levant, laying siege to Jerusalem in 1099. The siege was brutal, and after weeks of fighting, the Crusaders captured the city, massacring many Muslim and Jewish inhabitants. Jerusalem's fall symbolized Christian triumph and Muslim humiliation. The aftermath saw the creation of Crusader states, including the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the County of Tripoli, and the Principality of Antioch. These states were under constant threat from Muslim forces seeking to reclaim lost lands. While the Crusaders held territory with European support, sustaining these outposts proved challenging. Over time, Muslim leaders emerged to unite factions against the Crusaders. The most famous was Saladin, the Kurdish general and Sultan of Egypt and Syria. Rising to power in the late 12th century, Saladin led successful campaigns against the Crusader states, culminating in the recapture of Jerusalem in 1187, nearly 90 years after its initial loss. Renowned for military skill, chivalry, and humane treatment of prisoners, Saladin earned respect from both Muslims and Christians. His victories severely weakened the Crusader presence, prompting further European campaigns, including the Third Crusade, led by Richard the Lionheart of England, Philip II of France, and Frederick I of Germany. Despite capturing several key coastal cities, the Crusaders could not retake Jerusalem. A truce in 1192 allowed Christian pilgrims access to the city while leaving it under Muslim control. The Crusades had profound consequences for the Islamic world. They fostered unity among Muslims, reinforcing a shared religious and cultural identity. Saladin's leadership exemplified the reinvigoration of Muslim resistance and pride. The Crusades also contributed to the decline of the Byzantine Empire. The Fourth Crusade, 1202-1204, which culminated in the sack of Constantinople, weakened Byzantium, making it vulnerable to the Ottomans, who would eventually conquer the city in 1453. Despite the violence, the Crusades facilitated cultural and intellectual exchange. Europeans encountered the scientific, philosophical, and artistic achievements of the Muslim world, preserved since the Islamic Golden Age. Returning Crusaders brought knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and architecture back to Europe, influencing the Renaissance. Trade also flourished as Crusader states acted as intermediaries, facilitating the exchange of goods, such as spices, silk, and precious metals, strengthening economic ties between East and West. Nevertheless, the Crusades left a legacy of deep religious animosity. Violence and intolerance created lasting divisions between Christians and Muslims, shaping political and religious landscapes for centuries. The fall of Jerusalem, Saladin's victories, and the ensuing military campaigns became defining episodes in Islamic history. For Muslims, the Crusades were not merely military defeats, but a call to unity and resilience. The memory of Saladin and the steadfastness of the Muslim world became enduring symbols of Islamic strength, determination, and the capacity to withstand foreign domination. Chapter 15. The Rise of the Ottoman Empire. The rise of the Ottoman Empire in the late 13th and early 14th centuries was one of the most transformative events in Islamic history. From a small principality in northwestern Anatolia, the Ottomans expanded to control vast territories across Europe, Asia, and Africa, shaping the political, cultural, and military landscape of the Middle East for centuries. The empire was founded by Osman I, a Turkish tribal leader who sought to establish a state amid the power vacuum left by the declining Seljuk Empire. The Seljuks had been weakened by internal divisions and external threats, including the Mongol invasions of the 13th century. Osman I and his successors capitalized on this instability, building a cohesive and powerful state in Anatolia that would eventually become one of the largest empires in history. A key factor in Ottoman success was their military prowess. They were skilled in cavalry tactics, particularly light horse archers, and developed an elite infantry corps known as the Janissaries. Initially composed of Christian boys taken through the Devshirme system and converted to Islam, the Janissaries were trained as soldiers loyal to the Sultan. Their discipline and effectiveness became central to Ottoman military dominance and territorial expansion. In its early years, the Ottoman Empire focused on consolidating power in Anatolia, fighting wars against the Byzantine Empire, Seljuks, and rival Turkish tribes. By the mid-14th century, the Ottomans had established a foothold in the Balkans, marking the beginning of their expansion into Europe. One of the most significant milestones in Ottoman history was the conquest of Constantinople in 1453. Under Sultan Mehmed II, the Ottomans laid siege to the Byzantine capital for several months, eventually breaching its walls. The fall of Constantinople marked the end of the Byzantine Empire and the beginning of a new era for the Islamic world. The Ottomans gained control of a strategic city and key trade routes between Europe and Asia, while the Christian world suffered a devastating loss. Greek scholars fled to the West, bringing manuscripts and knowledge that would help fuel the European Renaissance. Following this victory, the Ottomans expanded further into Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, 1520 to 1566, oversaw the height of Ottoman power, conquering Hungary, parts of North Africa, and defeating the Safavid Empire in Persia. The empire also became a dominant naval force, controlling key Mediterranean trade routes and facilitating the flow of goods, ideas, and culture between continents. The empire's cosmopolitan nature was reflected in its diverse population, including Muslims, Christians, Jews, and multiple ethnic groups. Non-Muslims were generally allowed to practice their faith, though they paid a special tax, exemplifying Ottoman tolerance. Istanbul, the empire's capital, became a vibrant center of commerce, diplomacy, and culture, bridging East and West. Despite these achievements, the Ottomans faced internal challenges. Governing a vast, diverse empire became increasingly difficult. The Janissary corps, once disciplined and loyal, grew corrupt over time, and the Devshirme system was phased out, weakening military effectiveness. The centralized bureaucracy became bloated, further complicating administration. Externally, European powers, including the Habsburgs, Russia, and France, increasingly challenged Ottoman authority in the 17th and 18th centuries. Wars drained resources, and rising nationalist movements in the Balkans and other regions destabilized the empire. Internal revolts, combined with the pressures of modernization and European encroachment, accelerated decline. The final blow came in the early 20th century with the Ottoman defeat in World War I. The Allied powers dismantled the empire, and in 1923, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk established the Republic of Turkey. The fall of the Ottoman Empire marked the end of centuries of Islamic political dominance in the region. Yet, its legacy endures in the Middle East's political structures, cultural life, and the identity of modern Turkey, reflecting centuries of Ottoman influence on world history. Chapter 16: The Fall of the Safavid Empire. The Safavid Empire, one of the most influential powers in early modern Iran, emerged in the early 16th century and lasted over 2 centuries. Founded by Shah Ismail I, a charismatic and visionary leader, the Safavid dynasty sought to unify the Iranian plateau under Twelver Shia Islam. This dynasty played a central role in shaping Iran's political, cultural, and religious identity, yet eventually fell due to a combination of internal weaknesses and external pressures. The rise of the Safavids was intertwined with the religious and political turbulence of the late medieval period. In the early 1500s, Iran was fragmented, divided among Turkish, Kurdish, and Persian factions. The Sunni Ottoman Empire to the west and the Shia Safavid movement in the east competed for regional dominance. Shah Ismail I, born into the Safavid Sufi order, emerged as both a military commander and religious leader. His fervent advocacy for Shia Islam aimed to transform Iran into the spiritual heart of Shia culture. Ismail's early military campaigns were highly successful. By 1501, he had declared himself Shah of Iran, defeating rival Sunni forces and capturing much of present-day Iran and parts of Iraq. One of his most significant achievements was establishing Shia Islam as the state religion, a move that had enduring cultural and political consequences, distinguishing Iran from its Sunni neighbors and setting the stage for centuries of sectarian identity. The Safavid-Ottoman rivalry defined much of the empire's early history. Both empires fought for control of Iraq and the Caucasus in a series of wars throughout the 16th and 17th centuries. These conflicts were not only territorial, but also ideological, as Sunni and Shia forces competed for religious and political supremacy in the region. The Safavids, despite early successes, would ultimately face growing military and administrative challenges. After Shah Ismail's death in 1524, his successors struggled to maintain unity. The central government weakened, losing effective control over distant provinces, while military and administrative structures deteriorated. A key factor in the empire's decline was its inability to adapt to evolving military technologies. Initially reliant on cavalry, the Safavid army fell behind the gunpowder-based forces of the Ottomans and the rising Russian Empire. European powers, including the Portuguese and the British, also increasingly encroached on Persian Gulf and Indian Ocean trade, undermining Safavid influence. The 17th century brought further internal strife. Succession disputes, court corruption, and factionalism weakened the ruling family, while the once disciplined military became ineffective. Infighting diminished the empire's ability to defend against both internal revolts and external threats, leaving Iran vulnerable. The early 18th century saw the empire face catastrophic blows. Afghan forces, led by Mahmud of Ghazni, invaded Iran, capturing the Safavid capital, Isfahan, in 1722. This event marked the effective end of Safavid rule, as the empire's administrative and military structures collapsed under combined internal and external pressures. Beyond military defeat, the Safavids faced economic decline. Trade networks faltered, particularly the lucrative silk trade, reducing wealth and exacerbating internal instability. The fall of the Safavid Empire ended a pivotal era in Iranian history, but paved the way for new powers. Following the Afghan occupation, the Zand dynasty emerged in the mid-18th century, and later, the Qajar dynasty consolidated Iran's territory while facing foreign intervention and internal reform pressures. Despite its decline, the Safavid Empire left a lasting legacy. Its enforcement of Shia Islam solidified Iran's religious identity, distinguishing it from Sunni neighbors. The empire's architectural, artistic, and cultural achievements remain celebrated, with cities like Isfahan reflecting Safavid grandeur. Politically and militarily, the Safavids laid the foundations for Iran's enduring influence in the region. Their rise and fall illustrate the interplay of religion, politics, and military power in shaping the history of the Middle East. Chapter 17. The Rise of the Qajar Dynasty. After the fall of the Safavid Empire in the early 18th century, Iran entered a period of political fragmentation and instability. The country was plagued by internal strife, foreign invasions, and a lack of strong centralized leadership. Amid this turmoil, a new power emerged, the Qajar Dynasty. The rise of the Qajars marked the beginning of a new era in Iran's history, as the empire sought to consolidate authority and assert dominance in the region. The Qajar dynasty originated from a Turkic-speaking nomadic group known as the Qajars, who had settled around the Caspian Sea. In the early 18th century, they were a relatively minor tribal group, but the collapse of the Safavids created a power vacuum in Iran, drawing multiple factions into a struggle for control. The Afghans, the Zands, and the Qajars vied for supremacy, each attempting to shape the country in their own vision. The key figure in the rise of the Qajars was Aga Muhammad Khan, a ruthless and ambitious leader determined to unify Iran under his rule. Born in 1742, he was a member of the Qajar tribe and had been taken captive by the Afghans during their brief control of Iran. After his release, Aga Muhammad Khan returned to his people and began building a power base. Over the next decades, he used military skill, political strategy, and brutal tactics to defeat his rivals and consolidate power. In 1794, after years of bloody conflict, Aga Muhammad Khan defeated the Zand dynasty and captured the capital, Shiraz. He was crowned Shah, establishing Qajar rule in Iran, and moved the capital to Tehran, where the dynasty would remain for over a century. His reign was marked by centralization and harsh measures to suppress opposition, including violent purges of rival factions. Despite his brutality, Aga Muhammad Khan was a capable strategist, rebuilding infrastructure, strengthening the central government, and restoring military power. Under his leadership, much of Iran's territory was reclaimed. His reign, however, was brief. In 1797, he was assassinated in his palace, leaving the dynasty vulnerable. Aga Muhammad Khan was succeeded by his nephew, Fath Ali Shah, whose reign, 1797 to 1834, marked the height of Qajar power. Under Fath Ali Shah, Iran experienced relative stability and some prosperity, though weaknesses in governance and military capacity would soon emerge. His reign was defined by ambitious military campaigns aimed at expanding Iranian influence in the Caucasus and Central Asia, regions long contested by Russia and the Ottoman Empire. While he secured some territorial gains, including parts of Georgia, his forces suffered setbacks against the expanding Russian Empire. Fath Ali Shah also sought to strengthen the economy and consolidate control over trade routes, leveraging Iran's position between Europe and Asia. However, the growing influence of European powers, especially Britain and Russia, posed significant challenges. To maintain authority, the Qajars granted concessions in exchange for political and military support, allowing foreign powers increasing influence over Iranian affairs. Despite these alliances, the Qajar dynasty began to weaken in the mid-19th century. Rising nationalism and popular dissatisfaction with foreign interference led to unrest. The Qajars struggled to modernize Iran's military and economy in the face of European technological superiority. Administrative corruption and inefficiency further eroded the state's authority, leaving it unable to manage internal and external pressures effectively. The dynasty's decline culminated in the Constitutional Revolution of 1905 to 1911, a movement that sought to limit the power of the Shah and establish a constitutional monarchy. Sparked by corruption, foreign interference, and growing demands for reform, the revolution established a constitutional framework, but also intensified political instability. By the early 20th century, the Qajars were on the brink of collapse, their authority undermined by foreign powers, internal dissent, and structural weakness. In 1925, after a series of political crises and military coups, the Qajar dynasty was replaced by the Pahlavi dynasty under Reza Shah, ending the Qajar era. The legacy of the Qajars is complex. They played a central role in shaping modern Iran, influencing its political structures, social development, and economic patterns. Yet, their inability to modernize and adapt left the country vulnerable to foreign influence and internal unrest. Their reign laid the groundwork for the Pahlavi dynasty, which would seek to transform Iran into a centralized, industrialized nation. The Qajar dynasty represents both the resilience and limitations of post-Safavid Iran. a period of consolidation and revival, yet one hindered by internal weaknesses and external pressures. Their era shaped Iran's path toward modern statehood and left an enduring mark on its political, social, and cultural landscape. Chapter 18: The Constitutional Revolution and the Struggle for Reform. At the dawn of the 20th century, Iran was a nation in crisis. The Qajar dynasty, once a dominant force in the region, had become a shadow of its former self. Foreign influence, particularly from Russia and Britain, permeated the political and economic systems, leaving Iran vulnerable to external control. The monarchy itself had grown increasingly corrupt, unable to manage internal affairs effectively or safeguard the country's sovereignty. Public discontent, fueled by economic hardship, social inequality, and political weakness, finally erupted into the Constitutional Revolution of 1905 to 1911, a pivotal movement aimed at reforming Iran's government and society. The revolution was driven by a diverse coalition of reformists, including intellectuals, clerics, merchants, and members of the emerging middle class. Their common goal was to limit the absolute power of the Shah and establish a constitutional monarchy in which the people could participate in governance. The movement sought to create a modern state capable of protecting Iran's sovereignty, promoting social justice, and reducing the influence of foreign powers. The seeds of the constitutional movement had been sown over decades. Iran's economic decline, exacerbated by foreign interference, created widespread frustration. Government dependence on European powers for military and financial support had humiliated the nation, while the population suffered from poverty, inadequate infrastructure, and mismanagement. By the early 1900s, Iranians were increasingly unwilling to tolerate a monarchy that operated unchecked, nor a foreign presence that dominated national affairs. In 1905, a series of events ignited the revolution. The spark came in the form of the Tehran Bazaar movement, led by a coalition of merchants, intellectuals, and religious leaders angered by government-imposed taxes and foreign monopolies. The Bazaris, central to Iran's economy, protested these policies, demanding an end to corruption and foreign domination. Their movement quickly evolved into a broader call for constitutional reform, including limitations on the Shah's authority and the creation of a representative government. The constitutionalists drew inspiration from Western political models, particularly Britain's constitutional system, while seeking to preserve Iran's Islamic and cultural traditions. Their vision encompassed political, social, and legal reform, including the establishment of a legislative assembly, the Majlis, that would represent the people and participate in governance. By 1906, under mounting pressure, Shah Mozaffar ad-Din Shah reluctantly granted a constitution. This landmark decision established the Majlis, limited the Shah's power, and guaranteed civil liberties, including freedom of speech and assembly. It also created a judicial system that blended Sharia law with modern legal principles, signaling a significant step toward modern governance. However, implementation faced immediate obstacles. The Qajar dynasty, though formally recognizing the constitution, resisted meaningful reforms. Shah Mozaffar ad-Din's son, Muhammad Ali Shah, who ascended in 1907, opposed the movement outright. Determined to restore absolute monarchical power, he dissolved the Majlis in 1908 and launched a violent crackdown on constitutionalists. The suppression provoked widespread outrage, triggering a second wave of protests. Revolutionaries, supported by the population, laid siege to Tehran, eventually forcing Muhammad Ali Shah to flee in 1909. The Majlis was restored, marking a historic victory for the constitutionalists and a defining moment in Iran's modern history. Despite this success, the revolution could not resolve Iran's deeper challenges. The Majlis struggled to assert authority, reformist factions were divided, and the weakened Qajar monarchy retained significant influence. Foreign powers continued to dominate Iran's political and economic spheres, further undermining the state. Internal divisions among the revolutionaries also shaped the post-revolution landscape. Secular intellectuals sought Western-style modernization in politics, law, and education, while religious clerics aimed to preserve the Islamic character of governance and society. These tensions persisted, influencing Iran's political struggles for decades to come. The aftermath of the constitutional revolution left Iran in a fragile state. While it introduced the principles of constitutionalism and modern governance, it could not fully address long-standing issues of corruption, foreign influence, and weak institutions. Yet, it laid the foundation for political activism, civic engagement, and the eventual emergence of new leadership. In the years that followed, Iran faced continued internal unrest and external pressures, particularly from Britain and Russia, whose strategic and economic interests dominated Iranian affairs. This environment set the stage for the rise of a new power, the Pahlavi dynasty, which would seek to centralize authority and modernize Iran. The legacy of the constitutional revolution, however, endured. It represented the first major attempt to limit monarchical power, establish democratic principles, and assert Iran's sovereignty. The movement became a symbol of the Iranian people's resilience and their ongoing struggle for reform, independence, and modernization, shaping the trajectory of the nation well into the 20th century. Chapter 19: The Rise of Reza Shah and the Establishment of the Pahlavi Dynasty. After the Constitutional Revolution of 1905-1911, Iran remained a nation in political flux. While the Majlis, the Iranian parliament, had been restored and a constitution enacted, the country's stability was far from secure. Foreign powers, particularly Russia and Britain, continued to exert deep influence over Iran's political and economic affairs. Meanwhile, internal divisions among reformists and the Qajar monarchy's inability to govern effectively left the country vulnerable to unrest and external interference. Amidst this instability, a military leader named Reza Khan emerged, bringing a vision of a strong, centralized state that would transform Iran's political landscape. Reza Khan was born in 1878 in Alasht, a small town in northern Iran, to a modest family. He began his career in the Qajar military, joining the Cossack Brigade, an elite force trained and supported by Russia. The brigade had become a powerful political and military institution, often involved in coups and the enforcement of government authority. Reza Khan's early exposure to military structure and discipline within this unit laid the foundation for his rise to national prominence. By the early 1920s, Iran was deeply fragmented. The Qajar monarchy had lost legitimacy, internal politics were chaotic, and foreign influence undermined Iran's sovereignty. Recognizing this power vacuum, Reza Khan now a colonel in the Cossack Brigade, orchestrated a military coup in 1921. He swiftly ousted the ruling prime minister and consolidated control, effectively becoming the nation's de facto leader. By 1923, he was appointed prime minister by the weak and indecisive Shah Ahmad Qajar, who could not resist Reza Khan's growing authority. Reza Khan's rise reflected multiple factors: public disillusionment with the Qajars, the weakness of constitutional institutions, and the increasing role of military power in politics. Once in office, he focused on stabilizing the country through centralization, modernization, and nationalism. He sought to reduce the influence of tribal leaders and regional factions, strengthen the military, and create a government capable of asserting Iran's sovereignty. One of Reza Khan's most important objectives was reducing foreign interference. The British dominated Iran's oil industry through the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, while Russia maintained long-standing political and territorial ambitions. Reza Khan worked to reassert Iranian control over its resources, governance, emphasizing independence from external powers. In 1925, he formally abolished the Qajar dynasty and established the Pahlavi dynasty, crowning himself Reza Shah Pahlavi. This marked a decisive break from the past and the beginning of a new era of centralized authority. Reza Shah's reforms were wide-ranging. He invested in infrastructure, constructing roads, railways, and bridges to unify the country and facilitate trade. He modernized the military, establishing a disciplined and capable army that could enforce central authority. Education was reformed with a focus on secular and technical training, preparing a new generation for service in government, industry, and commerce. Industrialization was encouraged, and efforts were made to diversify the economy to reduce dependence on foreign powers. Despite these ambitious initiatives, Reza Shah's authoritarian approach generated opposition. Tribal leaders, conservative clergy, and intellectuals frequently resisted his secularization policies and modernization programs. Religious leaders, in particular, opposed reforms that challenged traditional Islamic practices and the social influence of the clergy. Political dissent was often suppressed, and opposition groups were tightly controlled, reflecting the tension between modernization and authoritarian rule. Reza Shah's reign from 1925 to 1941 transformed Iran into a more centralized, modern state. By strengthening the monarchy, expanding infrastructure, and reducing foreign influence, he established a foundation for national sovereignty and modernization. Yet, the authoritarian nature of his government and his disregard for traditional societal structures created friction, leaving parts of Iranian society alienated. In 1941, Reza Shah was forced to abdicate under pressure from British and Soviet forces during World War II, who feared his potential alignment with Axis powers. His son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, succeeded him, continuing the Pahlavi dynasty's rule for several more decades. Reza Shah's legacy endured. His modernization programs, centralization of power, and nationalist policies shaped Iran's political and social development, setting the stage for the dramatic reforms and upheavals that would follow in the mid-20th century. Reza Shah's rule was thus a turning point in Iranian history. By consolidating authority, curtailing foreign influence, and implementing ambitious modernization efforts, he created a more cohesive and independent state. Yet, the tensions between authoritarian governance and societal acceptance of reforms foreshadowed the ongoing struggles Iran would face in balancing modernization, tradition, and sovereignty in the decades to come. Chapter 20. The Early Years of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. The abdication of Reza Shah in 1941 marked a dramatic turning point in Iran's history. His son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, ascended the throne as the new Shah of Iran, inheriting a nation burdened by political Ottoman instability and foreign occupation. During World War II, Iran had been divided between British and Soviet forces, who justified their presence as necessary to secure supply lines and prevent the country from aligning with Axis powers. Though both nations had initially supported Reza Shah, his insistence on asserting Iranian independence and limiting Allied influence led to his forced abdication. The young Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, only 21 years old at the time, became king under circumstances that immediately highlighted the fragility of his rule. Upon his ascension, Mohammad Reza faced a nation deeply constrained by foreign control. British and Soviet forces maintained a strong presence, particularly around key oil-producing regions, and Iran's political institutions remained weak and fragmented. The Shah lacked the military authority and political experience of his father, making him appear reliant on foreign powers for legitimacy. Many Iranians viewed him as a monarch imposed by external forces rather than a sovereign ruler, and the country's economic and political systems were vulnerable to outside influence. Despite these challenges, Mohammad Reza gradually sought to assert his authority and develop a more independent foreign and domestic policy. One of his first strategic priorities was to secure the support of the United States, which had emerged as a global superpower after World War II. The U.S. had strategic and economic interests in Iran, particularly in oil, and as a counterbalance to Soviet influence during the early Cold War. By fostering close ties with Washington, the Shah hoped to gain political and military support that would strengthen his position against both internal rivals and foreign encroachment. A defining moment of this early period occurred in 1946, when the Shah confronted the issue of Soviet troops remaining in northern Iran, despite promises to withdraw following the end of World War II. With U.S. diplomatic backing, Mohammad Reza exerted pressure on the Soviet Union, ultimately leading to their withdrawal. This episode marked a significant achievement for the young Shah, as it demonstrated his ability to assert Iranian sovereignty and navigate complex international politics, boosting his credibility both domestically and abroad. The early years of Mohammad Reza's reign were also marked by the rise of domestic political opposition. Iran's political landscape was divided between secular reformists, religious factions, and emerging nationalist movements. Among the most influential figures during this period was Dr. Mohammad Mossadegh, a nationalist politician who advocated for the reduction of foreign influence and the creation of a more democratic government. Mossadegh's popularity stemmed from his call to nationalize Iran's oil industry, which had long been controlled by the British-owned Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. This proposal resonated deeply with the Iranian public, who had grown frustrated with foreign exploitation and economic inequality. The nationalization of the oil industry became a point of major contention, The British government opposed the move, imposing economic sanctions and seeking to undermine Mossadegh's administration. Initially, the Shah was cautious about confronting the British, attempting to balance his need for domestic stability with the pressures of international diplomacy. However, tensions between Mossadegh and Mohammad Reza escalated as the Shah struggled to maintain control over a rapidly evolving political environment. In 1953, after months of political and economic crisis, the Shah regained his position as the dominant authority through a covert operation orchestrated by the United States and Britain known as Operation Ajax. The coup successfully removed Mossadegh from power, who was subsequently arrested and placed under house arrest. While the operation solidified the Shah's control, it also entrenched Iran's reliance on foreign support and deepened public resentment toward his regime. Following the coup, Mohammad Reza consolidated power, centralizing authority, and taking a more authoritarian approach to governance. His subsequent modernization programs, particularly the White Revolution of the 1960s, sought to transform Iran into a modern, industrialized nation. These reforms included land redistribution, infrastructure development, and expanded education initiatives, yet they were met with resistance from clergy, rural communities, and leftist groups who opposed the rapid social changes and perceived westernization. Despite his efforts, discontent continued to grow. Many Iranians viewed the Shah as a puppet of Western powers, particularly the United States, and criticized his failure to address social inequality and political repression. These tensions would ultimately culminate in the Iranian Revolution of 1979, ending the Pahlavi dynasty and establishing the Islamic Republic. Nonetheless, the early years of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi's reign laid the foundation for Iran's mid-20th century transformation, highlighting the delicate balance between modernization, foreign influence, and domestic politics that would define his rule. Chapter 21: The Nationalization of Oil and the Rise of Mossadegh. The post-World War II years were a period of immense change and political upheaval in Iran. Long under the influence of foreign powers, the country found itself at a critical juncture in its struggle for independence and sovereignty. Central to this struggle was the control of Iran's vast oil resources. Since the early 20th century, the British-controlled Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, AIOC, later known as British Petroleum, BP, held a monopoly on Iran's oil. While the British profited immensely, Iranians saw little benefit from their own resources, fueling widespread resentment. Economic stagnation and social inequality exacerbated public frustration. The issue of oil became a rallying point for Iranian nationalists seeking to reclaim control over their natural wealth and end foreign exploitation. Leading this movement was Dr. Mohammad Mossadegh, a principled and charismatic politician. A staunch advocate of constitutional monarchy, democratic governance, and national sovereignty, Mossadegh had studied in Europe, where he was exposed to modern democratic ideals and the importance of self-determination. Upon returning to Iran, he quickly emerged as a leading figure in the nationalist movement. Mossadegh's political philosophy emphasized Iranian independence and the protection of national resources. He believed that decades of foreign domination, particularly by Britain, had undermined Iran's sovereignty. His push to nationalize the oil industry resonated with the public, presenting a vision in which Iran could control its own wealth and benefit its citizens. The move toward nationalization symbolized both economic justice and political independence. In 1951, Mossadegh was appointed prime minister, and one of his first major actions was the nationalization of the oil industry. The Iranian parliament passed the Nationalization of Oil Act, transferring control of oil from the British-owned AIOC to the Iranian government. Britain reacted with outrage, viewing the nationalization as a direct threat to its economic interests. The British imposed an economic blockade on Iran, cutting off oil exports and pressuring other nations to boycott Iranian oil. They also supported political opposition groups within Iran in an effort to destabilize Mossadegh's government. Despite this foreign pressure, Mossadegh remained resolute. He became a national hero to many Iranians for challenging decades of foreign control. However, his policies faced opposition at home from elite and military factions concerned about the potential loss of their influence and privileges. The economic blockade and disruption of oil exports soon took a toll, leading to inflation, unemployment, and growing dissatisfaction among the middle class, which had initially supported him. Conservative and religious groups also began to mobilize against Mossadegh, intensifying political instability. By 1953, the situation reached a climax. The United States, fearing that Mossadegh's nationalist policies might push Iran toward the Soviet Union during the height of the Cold War, collaborated with Britain to orchestrate a coup known as Operation Ajax. The CIA coordinated propaganda campaigns, bribed officials, and organized protests to undermine Mossadegh's government. On August 19, 1953, the operation succeeded. Mossadegh was removed from power, and the Shah was reinstated as the absolute ruler of Iran. The coup had far-reaching consequences. The Shah, now dependent on U.S. support, reversed the nationalization of oil, reopening the industry to Western companies under favorable terms. Mossadegh was placed under house arrest for the remainder of his life, but he remained a symbol of Iranian nationalism and resistance to foreign domination. The coup discredited the idea of democratic governance and strengthened the Shah's authoritarian rule, setting a precedent for political repression. The events surrounding oil nationalization and the 1953 coup marked a turning point in Iranian history. They highlighted the tension between nationalism and foreign intervention, democracy and authoritarianism, and the aspirations of the Iranian people versus the interests of global powers. Mossadegh's rise and fall became emblematic of the struggle for sovereignty, and his legacy continued to inspire future generations. The coup and its aftermath also laid the groundwork for growing public resentment, which would eventually erupt in the Iranian Revolution of 1979, ending the Pahlavi dynasty and establishing the Islamic Republic of Iran. Chapter 22: The Rise of Reza Shah and the Formation of the Pahlavi dynasty. In the early 20th century, Iran was a nation struggling to assert its sovereignty while grappling with internal instability and foreign interference. The Qajar dynasty, which had ruled for over a century, proved increasingly incapable of managing the country's political and economic challenges. Iran's rich natural resources, particularly oil, made it a focal point of imperial interest, especially for Britain and Russia, both of whom sought to extend their influence over the region. The Qajars' inability to respond effectively to these pressures combined with rampant corruption and weak governance, created widespread dissatisfaction among the Iranian people. Amid this climate of uncertainty, a military officer named Reza Khan emerged as a decisive figure capable of transforming the country. Born in 1878, in a small village in northern Iran, Reza Khan came from humble origins. He joined the military at a young age and quickly distinguished himself through discipline, determination, and strategic skill. His rise was aided by the Persian Cossack Brigade, an elite military unit with strong political influence, which also received backing from British and Russian officials who viewed Reza Khan as a stabilizing force who could protect their interests in Iran. By 1921, Reza Khan had become a dominant figure in Iranian politics. He led a coup against the Qajar government, installing himself as head of the new administration. This coup, relatively bloodless, marked the effective end of Qajar rule and the beginning of a new political era. Many Iranians viewed Reza Khan's rise as necessary. The country was economically fragile, politically fragmented, and militarily weak. Reza Khan presented himself as the leader capable of restoring order and modernizing Iran, drawing inspiration from other nations that had embraced reform to strengthen their states. Once in power, Reza Khan moved quickly to consolidate authority and centralize governance. In 1925, he formally abolished the Qajar dynasty and established the Pahlavi dynasty, crowning himself Reza Shah Pahlavi. His assumption of the throne marked a decisive break from the past and set the stage for a comprehensive program of modernization. Reza Shah envisioned a strong, independent Iran capable of resisting foreign domination and asserting itself as a modern state. Central to his modernization program was the creation of a professional, powerful military. He reorganized the armed forces along European lines, particularly influenced by Germany's military model, bringing in foreign advisors and implementing new training and organizational structures. A strong military served both as a means of defending Iran's sovereignty and as a tool for consolidating central authority over regional factions and tribal leaders who had long challenged the state's control. Reza Shah also prioritized economic and infrastructural development. Roads, railways, bridges, and communication networks were built to connect the country and facilitate trade. He encouraged domestic industry, established factories, promoted mining, and supported Iranian-owned businesses to reduce dependence on foreign powers. Education reforms aimed at increasing literacy and technical expertise were also implemented, although these measures were often top-down and enforced through strict state control, leaving little room for political dissent. Perhaps the most controversial aspect of Reza Shah's rule was his effort to secularize Iranian society and limit the influence of the Shiite clergy. In 1936, he banned the traditional chador for women and sought to replace religious schools with Western-style education. These moves provoked significant resistance from religious leaders and their followers, highlighting the tension between modernization and traditional values. Reza Shah also promoted a national identity rooted in pre-Islamic Persian heritage, including renaming the country from Persia to Iran to reflect its Aryan and historical roots. Reza Shah's policies strengthened Iran's state institutions and laid the foundation for industrialization and modernization. However, his assertive approach also made him a target of foreign powers during World War II. Britain and the Soviet Union Fearing Nazi influence and desiring control of Iranian resources and supply routes, invaded Iran in 1941. Reza Shah was forced to abdicate in favor of his son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, marking the end of his reign. Despite his abdication, Reza Shah's impact on Iran was profound. He established the Pahlavi dynasty, centralized authority, modernized the economy and infrastructure, and attempted to create a secular, nationalist society. These reforms would shape Iran for decades, but they also sowed seeds of resentment among traditionalists and political opponents. Under his son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, Iran continued on a path of modernization and political consolidation, setting the stage for future conflicts that would ultimately culminate in the Iranian Revolution of 1979, Chapter 23, World War II and the Allies' impact on Iran. World War II reshaped the global order, and Iran, despite declaring neutrality, became deeply entangled in the conflict. The war's influence on Iran was multifaceted, affecting the country militarily, politically, economically, and socially. Its strategic location and oil resources drew the attention of both Britain and the Soviet Union, turning Iran into a critical corridor for Allied operations and dramatically altering the nation's trajectory. Before the war, Iran had been struggling with internal instability and foreign interference. The Pahlavi regime under Reza Shah sought to modernize the country while preserving its sovereignty, pursuing a policy of neutrality. However, as the global conflict intensified, Iran's strategic position became increasingly precarious. Its location as a land bridge between Europe, the Middle East, and the Soviet Union made it a crucial supply route, while its oil fields in the southwest, controlled by the British-owned Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, AIOC, remained a point of contention. Despite Reza Shah's efforts to assert independence, British economic dominance over Iran persisted. The Allies, particularly Britain and the Soviet Union, recognized Iran's importance. The Soviet Union, engaged in fierce battles against Nazi Germany on the Eastern Front, depended on supplies delivered through Iran, while Britain relied on Iranian oil for its war industries. The Persian Corridor became a vital lifeline, allowing essential resources from the United States and Britain to reach Soviet forces. Iran's geopolitical significance, therefore, brought it to the center of international military and diplomatic attention. By 1941, the Allies grew increasingly concerned about Reza Shah's perceived sympathies toward Germany. His admiration for German military efficiency and his resistance to British influence heightened fears that Iran might align with the Axis powers. In August of that year, Britain and the Soviet Union launched a joint invasion of Iran. The operation was swift and largely bloodless, as Iranian forces were unable to resist the overwhelming military might of the invaders. The invasion underscored that Iran's sovereignty would not be respected when global strategic interests were at stake. Facing this intervention, Reza Shah was forced to abdicate in favor of his son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. The young Shah inherited a nation under foreign occupation, with British and Soviet troops controlling key infrastructure, including oil facilities, railways, and roads. Mohammad Reza's early reign, therefore, began under the shadow of foreign influence, a stark contrast to his father's attempts at independent modernization. The Allied occupation brought both challenges and opportunities. The influx of foreign troops disrupted traditional life created inflation and strained resources, yet it also spurred infrastructural development. New roads, railways, and airports were built to facilitate the movement of troops and supplies, laying the foundation for future economic growth. Iranian society was transformed as well. Women increasingly entered the workforce to support wartime production, marking the beginning of long-term changes in gender roles, while cities experienced the social upheaval of foreign occupation. Politically, the war catalyzed nationalist sentiment. The visible presence and control of foreign powers in Iranian affairs inspired calls for sovereignty and self-determination. Among the emerging nationalist leaders was Mohammad Mossadegh, a vocal critic of British dominance over Iran's oil and a key figure in the post-war movement for economic and political independence. Mossadegh's advocacy for oil nationalization would later trigger one of the most significant political crises in Iranian history. Economically, the war years were difficult. Inflation and shortages plagued the population, and the reliance on foreign powers exposed the country's vulnerabilities. Yet the infrastructure improvements and industrial efforts initiated during the Allied presence provided a foundation that later Iranian leaders would seek to build upon. Even after World War II ended in 1945, its impact on Iran lingered. The Pahlavi regime faced the challenge of balancing foreign interests with growing domestic demands for independence. The occupation left a legacy of political awareness, economic disruption, and social change that would influence Iran's trajectory for decades. The experience of foreign intervention, coupled with the country's strategic importance and its desire for modernization, set the stage for the political upheavals of the 1950s and beyond. Ultimately, World War II marked a turning point for Iran. It exposed the fragility of the nation's sovereignty, accelerated social and infrastructural change, and catalyzed a nationalist movement that would come to define post-war Iranian politics. While the Allies' presence had been temporary, their influence left lasting effects on Iran's political landscape, shaping the challenges and opportunities that Mohammad Reza Pahlavi and future leaders would confront. Chapter 24: The Nationalization of Oil and the Rise of Mohammad Mossadegh. The years following World War II were a transformative period for Iran, a nation grappling with its independence, sovereignty, and the growing influence of foreign powers. One of the most consequential events of this era was the nationalization of Iran's oil industry, a bold move that would redefine the country's political and economic landscape and bring Iran into direct confrontation with Britain and the United States. For decades, Iran's vast oil resources had been dominated by the British-owned Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, AIOC, later known as British Petroleum. The British profited enormously from Iran's oil, while the Iranian people received only a small fraction of the wealth generated from their own natural resources. This imbalance became a symbol of foreign exploitation and a rallying point for nationalist sentiment across the country. Economic stagnation, widespread poverty, and growing frustration with foreign domination created fertile ground for political change. Amid this climate, Mohammad Mossadegh emerged as a central figure. A highly educated and principled politician, Mossadegh had previously served in the Iranian government and developed a deep understanding of the country's political structures. He was a passionate advocate for Iranian sovereignty, constitutionalism, and democratic governance, and he saw the nationalization of oil as both a practical and symbolic act to reclaim the country's wealth and dignity. In 1951, Mossadegh became Iran's prime minister. One of his first major initiatives was the introduction of a bill to nationalize the oil industry, transferring control of Iran's oil from the British to the Iranian government. This move captured the imagination of the Iranian public and cemented Mossadegh's popularity as a champion of national sovereignty. For many Iranians, the nationalization of oil was more than an economic policy. It was a declaration of independence and a rejection of decades of foreign exploitation. The British government responded with fierce opposition. Heavily reliant on Iranian oil for its economy, Britain imposed an embargo, cutting off exports and isolating Iran from the global oil market. The economic consequences were severe. Unemployment rose, inflation soared, and domestic industries faced shortages. The British also sought to destabilize Mossadegh's government by applying political and diplomatic pressure, attempting to undermine his leadership through covert support for opposition forces within Iran. Despite these pressures, Mossadegh remained steadfast. He argued that national control over Iran's resources was a matter of national pride and self-determination. However, not all Iranians supported his approach. Members of the military, segments of the political elite, and some business leaders feared that nationalization would cripple the economy and provoke foreign retaliation. The Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, was caught in a difficult position, balancing nationalist sentiment at home with intense pressure from Britain and the United States to curb Mossadegh's power. The United States, while not as directly involved as Britain initially, grew increasingly concerned that Mossadegh's policies could drive Iran closer to the Soviet Union during the height of the Cold War. Alongside Britain, the U.S. began planning Mossadegh's removal. The result was a covert operation orchestrated by the CIA and British intelligence agency MI6, known as Operation Ajax. The plan combined propaganda, bribery, and support for opposition groups, culminating in a military-backed coup designed to remove Mossadegh from power. On August 19, 1953, the coup succeeded. Mossadegh was arrested, and the Shah was restored to the throne with reinforced authority and Western backing. The nationalization of oil was effectively reversed, and Iran entered into new agreements that reopened the country's oil industry to foreign companies, restoring much of the pre-nationalization status quo. The consequences of the coup were profound and long-lasting. While Mossadegh's removal ended his immediate political influence, his legacy endured. He became a symbol of Iranian nationalism and resistance to foreign domination. The coup also deepened distrust toward the United States and Britain, a sentiment that would continue to shape Iranian politics for decades and culminate in the Islamic Revolution of 1979. Under the restored Shah, authoritarian rule intensified, political opposition was suppressed, and Iran's political system tilted heavily in favor of the monarchy. Yet the ideals that Mossadegh championed, national sovereignty, economic independence, and the right of the Iranian people to control their own resources, remained influential. The nationalization of oil, though short-lived, inspired future generations to pursue these goals, highlighting the enduring tension between domestic aspirations and foreign interests in Iran. The story of Mossadegh and Iran's oil nationalization remains a defining chapter in modern Iranian history. It reflects the struggle of a nation to reclaim its resources and assert its sovereignty against powerful foreign actors. It also foreshadows the political and social upheavals that would continue to shape Iran in the second half of the 20th century, illustrating the profound challenges faced by a country seeking independence while navigating a complex international landscape. Chapter 25: The Aftermath of the Coup and the Shah's Return to Power. The 1953 coup in Iran marked a defining moment in the country's modern history. The overthrow of Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh and the reinstatement of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah, were more than mere political shifts. They represented a turning point in Iran's relationship with foreign powers, particularly the United States and Britain, and fundamentally altered the dynamic between the monarchy and the Iranian people. The operation, orchestrated by the CIA and MI6 under the code name Operation Ajax, left an enduring imprint on Iran's political and social fabric, setting the stage for decades of tension and unrest that would culminate in the Islamic Revolution of 1979. For the United States and Britain, the successful execution of the coup was a strategic victory. It ensured that Iran remained within the Western sphere of influence during the Cold War and restored access to the country's vital oil resources. To the Iranian populace, however, the coup symbolized foreign domination and the fragility of Iran's sovereignty. Mossadegh, a popular nationalist and symbol of democratic governance, had been removed, and his supporters, who had championed the nationalization of the oil industry, felt betrayed. The Shah's restoration, although welcomed by Western powers, deepened the divide between the monarchy and large segments of Iranian society, sowing seeds of mistrust that would persist for decades. With the backing of the United States and Britain, the Shah consolidated his power, establishing a more centralized and authoritarian regime. Military and economic support from the West bolstered the monarchy, enabling the Shah to suppress political opposition and strengthen the institutions of state. The United States, having observed the destabilizing effects of Mossadegh's nationalist policies, prioritized a stable, pro-Western Iran. In turn, the Shah relied heavily on Western aid to maintain control, creating a cycle of dependency that further alienated nationalist and leftist factions within Iran. Despite his reinforced authority, the Shah faced a deeply fractured society. Many Iranians, particularly those who had supported Mossadegh's nationalist movement, viewed the Shah as a puppet of foreign powers. Discontent extended beyond politics into the economic sphere. Although Iran's oil industry returned to Western control, the wealth generated was unevenly distributed. Much of the revenue was concentrated among the elite and used to fund the Shah's modernization projects, while the majority of Iranians continued to struggle with poverty and lack of opportunity. In response, the Shah launched a series of modernization initiatives aimed at industrialization, infrastructure development, and educational reform. While these policies transformed Iran's cities and created a modern industrial sector, they often disproportionately benefited the wealthy and politically connected. At the same time, political opposition was met with increasingly severe repression. The secret police, Savak, trained and supported by the United States and Israel, became a notorious tool of state control, using tactics such as torture, imprisonment, and intimidation to silence dissent. Savak's brutality heightened public resentment and cemented the perception of the Shah as an authoritarian ruler beholden to foreign powers. As repression intensified, opposition movements grew in strength and organization. Leftist groups advocated for social justice and economic redistribution, while the Islamic opposition coalesced around figures like Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, a prominent cleric who had been exiled by the Shah. Khomeini and his followers criticized the monarchy for its dependence on Western powers, secularizing reforms, and disregard for traditional Islamic values. Over time, the Islamic opposition gained broad support among Iranians who were disillusioned by economic inequality, political repression, and cultural changes imposed from above. The events following the 1953 coup set the stage for decades of political instability. Although the Shah attempted to maintain control through modernization and alignment with the West, his regime increasingly alienated significant segments of society. The coup not only ended Mossadegh's brief experiment with democratic governance, but also entrenched a pattern of authoritarian rule dependent on foreign support. The long-term consequences of this intervention were profound. Distrust toward Western powers, resentment toward the monarchy, and the eventual rise of revolutionary movements. Ultimately, the 1953 coup sowed the seeds of the Shah's downfall. By the late 1970s, decades of authoritarian rule, economic inequality, and repression had created widespread discontent. In 1979, the Iranian Revolution erupted, culminating in the overthrow of the Shah and the establishment of the Islamic Republic under Khomeini. The revolution can be traced, in part, to the legacy of Operation Ajax and the deep mistrust it created between the Iranian people and their government, highlighting the enduring impact of foreign intervention. The coup of 1953 remains a symbol of foreign interference and the suppression of democratic aspirations in Iran. While it temporarily secured Western interests and reinforced the Shah's authority, it also deepened political divisions and resentment, shaping Iran's political trajectory for decades. Mossadegh's removal and the Shah's subsequent authoritarianism left an indelible mark on Iranian society, reinforcing the complexities of sovereignty, modernization, and foreign influence in the country's modern history. Chapter 26: The Iranian Revolution, the Fall of the Shah. The Iranian Revolution of 1979 marked the dramatic end of more than 2.5 decades of Pahlavi rule and represented a profound turning point in Iran's modern history. It was the culmination of years of political unrest, economic inequality, and popular dissatisfaction with the monarchy. Unlike many revolutions centered around a single leader or ideology, the Iranian Revolution was a complex coalition of disparate groups, including Marxists, secular nationalists, and the increasingly powerful Islamic clerical establishment, led by Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. Together, these factions challenged the Shah's authority and ultimately succeeded in overthrowing the monarchy, paving the way for the establishment of the Islamic Republic. By the late 1970s, the Shah's reign had become increasingly unpopular. His close ties to Western powers, especially the United States, fueled perceptions of him as a puppet, serving foreign interests rather than the Iranian people. While Iran's oil wealth had brought the country substantial revenues, the benefits were distributed unevenly, enriching the elite while leaving the majority of the population in relative poverty. Rising inflation, unemployment, and economic mismanagement compounded social grievances. Corruption within the government, coupled with the Shah's authoritarian rule and reliance on the secret police Savak, created widespread resentment across all layers of society. The Islamic opposition, led by Khomeini, had been gaining influence since the late 1960s. Exiled for his criticism of the Shah's secularization policies, Khomeini had become a symbol of resistance to Western influence and secular modernization. His rhetoric emphasized the defense of Islamic values, national sovereignty, and social justice, resonating deeply with many Iranians who felt alienated by the Shah's rapid modernization efforts and the erosion of traditional cultural norms. Khomeini's portrayal of the Shah as a Western-backed autocrat effectively galvanized support among the clergy, students, workers, and broader segments of the population. Throughout the 1970s, protests and strikes against the Shah became increasingly frequent and widespread. Workers, students, intellectuals, and religious groups all voiced opposition to the regime, creating a climate of near-constant unrest. The Shah attempted to suppress dissent through military force and the activities of Savak, but violent crackdowns only fueled anger and intensified the opposition. By 1978, mass demonstrations had become more coordinated and more difficult to control, signaling the regime's weakening grip on power. Faced with mounting pressure, the Shah left Iran in January 1979, ostensibly for medical treatment. His departure was widely interpreted as an abdication of responsibility and a tacit acknowledgement that his rule was no longer sustainable. The resulting power vacuum allowed Khomeini to return from exile in France on February 1, 1979, to an enthusiastic reception. Tens of thousands of Iranians lined the streets of Tehran, celebrating the return of their leader. The revolution was now in full force, and Khomeini's supporters were poised to seize control. On February 11, 1979, the Shah's regime effectively collapsed. Armed clashes between revolutionary forces and loyalist military units erupted across the country, but the revolutionaries quickly gained the upper hand. The military, once a pillar of the Shah's authority, disbanded, allowing revolutionary factions to march on Tehran. With the monarchy's fall, Iran was officially declared an Islamic republic, and Khomeini assumed the role of supreme leader, establishing a new theocratic political system. The revolution dramatically altered Iran's domestic and international landscape. It ended the Pahlavi dynasty and severed the close relationship between Iran and the United States, a key pillar of the Shah's power. While the revolution initially inspired hope for social justice, economic equality, and national sovereignty, it also brought new challenges. The revolutionary government quickly became dominated by Khomeini's Islamic faction, marginalizing secular, leftist, and other opposition groups. Early events, such as the seizure of the U.S. Embassy in November 1979, further strained Iran's relations with the West and signaled the onset of decades-long hostility between Iran and the United States. For many Iranians, the revolution represented both triumph and disappointment. It dismantled a repressive monarchy and promised a government attentive to the needs of the marginalized. But the reality of post-revolutionary governance revealed new forms of authoritarianism. Khomeini consolidated power, suppressed dissent, and established a political system grounded in strict religious principles, which often clashed with the pluralistic hopes of many revolutionary participants. Despite these complexities, the fall of the Shah was an historic achievement that reshaped Iranian society, politics, and culture. It ended foreign-dominated monarchy, ushered in a theocratic government, and fundamentally transformed the country's identity. The Iranian Revolution of 1979 was not merely a change in leadership. It was a profound social and political upheaval, whose repercussions would continue to shape Iran and its relations with the world for decades to come. Chapter 27: The Iran-Iraq War, the conflict that defined a generation. The Iran-Iraq War, which raged from 1980 to 1988, stands as one of the longest and most devastating conflicts in modern Middle Eastern history. It profoundly affected the political, social, and economic landscapes of both nations and had far-reaching consequences for the broader region. The war was initiated by Iraqi President Saddam Hussein, who sought to exploit the turmoil following the Iranian Revolution to expand Iraq's regional influence, assert control over disputed territory, and suppress the spread of revolutionary Shiite movements that threatened his regime. Several factors contributed to the outbreak of war. Ideologically, Iraq's secular Arab nationalist regime, led by Saddam Hussein, stood in stark contrast to Iran's newly established Islamic Republic under Ayatollah Khomeini. The 1979 Iranian Revolution had unsettled Iraq's Sunni-dominated leadership, as Khomeini's calls for Islamic revolution and anti-imperialism resonated strongly among Shiite populations in the region, particularly within Iraq itself. Saddam feared that Khomeini's influence could inspire a domestic uprising among Iraq's Shiite majority, challenging his authority and the power of the Sunni elite. Territorial disputes further fueled the conflict, particularly over the Shatt al-Arabi waterway, a strategically vital channel forming Iraq's southern border with Iran. Control of the Shatt al-Arab was crucial for both nations' oil exports and trade, making it a highly contested region. Saddam sought to assert dominance over this waterway, expand Iraq's economic advantages, and weaken Iran, which he perceived as politically unstable and vulnerable in the wake of its revolution. On September 22, 1980, Saddam Hussein launched a full-scale invasion of Iran, targeting key territories, including the oil-rich Khuzestan province. Early in the conflict, Iraqi forces made rapid advances, capturing significant portions of Iranian land. However, Iran's revolutionary government quickly mobilized in response. Khomeini framed the invasion as an existential struggle for the survival of the Islamic Revolution, calling for a defense of the nation through sacred jihad. Mass mobilization ensued, with millions of Iranians joining the Abbasid volunteer militias to bolster regular military forces, reflecting a powerful combination of nationalism, religious fervor, and revolutionary zeal. Despite early territorial gains by Iraq, the war quickly became a protracted stalemate. Both sides engaged in brutal trench warfare, with repeated offensives and counteroffensives resulting in massive casualties and little strategic progress. The civilian population bore a heavy burden, facing bombardments, sieges, and widespread destruction. One of the most horrifying aspects of the war was Iraq's use of chemical weapons, including mustard gas and nerve agents, which targeted Iranian forces and civilians alike. These attacks caused indiscriminate suffering and left a long-term legacy of physical and psychological trauma. The war had profound internal consequences for Iran. The Islamic Republic consolidated control by intensifying repression, silencing political opponents, intellectuals, and dissident groups. Khomeini portrayed the war as essential to defending the revolution, creating a national narrative centered on martyrdom and sacrifice. While Iran survived Iraq's initial invasion, the war consumed vast human and economic resources, leaving the country devastated. Internationally, the conflict drew complex involvement. The United States, while officially neutral, covertly supported Iraq by providing intelligence, financing, and military assistance, seeking to contain the spread of Iran's revolutionary influence after the 1979 hostage crisis. Other regional actors, including Gulf states, also supported Iraq to prevent revolutionary Shiism from destabilizing their own governments. Meanwhile, Iran faced diplomatic isolation, intensifying the country's economic hardships. Iran launched repeated offensives to reclaim lost territory and inflict damage on Iraq's infrastructure, achieving limited success but unable to secure a decisive victory. Both nations endured staggering human costs, with estimates of over 1 million casualties on each side, including soldiers and civilians. By 1988, after 8 years of war, exhaustion, economic collapse, and international pressure led both parties to accept a United Nations brokered ceasefire. The war ended in a stalemate, with neither side achieving its initial objectives. The aftermath left enduring scars. Iraq emerged economically weakened, politically unstable, and diplomatically isolated, despite Saddam Hussein retaining power. Iran preserved the Islamic Republic and maintained its revolutionary ideology, but suffered severe population loss, economic devastation, and infrastructure destruction. The war entrenched militarization in both societies, fostered deep-seated mistrust, and reinforced authoritarian control. The Iran-Iraq War shaped a generation, leaving a legacy of trauma, political tension, and regional instability. It highlighted the dangers of ideological conflict and territorial disputes, while also solidifying the Islamic Republic's narrative of survival and resistance. Its consequences continue to influence Middle Eastern geopolitics, demonstrating the enduring impact of one of the 20th century's most destructive conflicts. Chapter 28: The Rise of Al-Qaeda and the Aftermath of the Gulf War. The Gulf War of 1990-1991, often referred to as the Persian Gulf War, was a defining moment in the modern history of the Middle East and a turning point in global geopolitics. The conflict was triggered by Iraq's invasion of Kuwait, a small but oil-rich nation. Saddam Hussein, still reeling from the economic and political fallout of the 8-year Iran-Iraq War, sought to consolidate regional power and seize Kuwait's oil reserves to strengthen Iraq's position. However, the invasion immediately drew international condemnation and led to the formation of a U.S.-led coalition of nations determined to expel Iraqi forces and restore regional stability. On August 2, 1990, Iraqi troops entered Kuwait, sparking a crisis that reverberated worldwide. Saddam Hussein's actions were viewed as a direct threat to the stability of the Persian Gulf, a critical artery for global oil supplies. the United Nations quickly condemned the invasion, passing resolutions demanding Iraq's withdrawal. The coalition, assembled under U.S. leadership, included forces from Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, united in their interest in preserving the security of the region and ensuring the uninterrupted flow of oil. The military campaign, known as Operation Desert Storm, began in January 1991. After months of diplomatic efforts and economic sanctions failed to persuade Iraq to withdraw, the coalition launched a massive air and ground offensive, employing advanced technology, including precision-guided munitions, stealth aircraft, and integrated communications systems. The campaign quickly overwhelmed Iraqi forces, demonstrating the effectiveness of modern warfare, while highlighting the imbalance of military power between Iraq and the technologically superior coalition. Kuwait was liberated within months, and Iraqi forces were forced to retreat, though Saddam Hussein remained in power, leaving Iraq politically weakened and economically devastated. The Gulf War's aftermath had far-reaching consequences, particularly in contributing to the rise of al-Qaeda, one of the most influential and dangerous terrorist organizations in modern history. Al-Qaeda's origins can be traced to the Soviet-Afghan War of the 1980s, where fighters, including Osama bin Laden, gained combat experience resisting Soviet forces. Bin Laden, a Saudi national, emerged as a key figure in the global jihadist movement, advocating a strict, militant interpretation of Islam and promoting the idea of a global struggle against perceived enemies of Islam, including Western powers and secular regimes in the Middle East. Initially, bin Laden expressed support for resisting Saddam Hussein's aggression in Kuwait, but the deployment of U.S. troops to Saudi Arabia, home to Islam's holiest sites, profoundly changed his stance. To bin Laden and his followers, the American military presence on sacred Islamic soil was a violation of religious and national sovereignty. This perceived desecration became a rallying point, transforming bin Laden's focus from regional jihad to a broader campaign against Western influence in the Muslim world. The Gulf War, therefore, acted as a catalyst in turning al-Qaeda from a regional militant organization into a global jihadist network. By the early 1990s, al-Qaeda had begun organizing and training fighters, establishing safe havens in Afghanistan, which was under Taliban control. The group's ideology emphasized violent resistance to Western intervention, and it sought to overthrow governments deemed insufficiently Islamic. Al-Qaeda gained traction among disenfranchised youth and radicalized individuals across the Muslim world, particularly those angered by the Gulf War's outcomes, including the ongoing sanctions against Iraq and perceived failures of Arab governments to defend their people from foreign domination. Al-Qaeda's first major attacks on U.S. interests occurred in 1998, with coordinated bombings of American embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, killing over 200 people and injuring thousands. These attacks demonstrated the group's operational capacity and its ability to project violence across continents. However, it was the September 11, 2001 attacks on the United States that cemented al-Qaeda's role as a central force in global terrorism, forever altering international security priorities and prompting the U.S.-led War on Terror. The Gulf War and its aftermath had profound implications for the Middle East. Iraq's military and infrastructure were devastated. Saddam Hussein's regime remained authoritarian yet weakened, and the U.S. presence in the region fostered resentment that would feed radical movements. The war illustrated the deepening divide between Western powers and the Arab world and underscored how foreign intervention could fuel extremism. Al-Qaeda's rise highlighted the power of ideology in mobilizing individuals for violent causes, showing how political grievances, religious fervor, and social discontent could be combined into a global jihadist movement. The Gulf War provided both the conditions and the narrative that allowed al-Qaeda to thrive, demonstrating that military victories alone could not resolve deeper social and political tensions in the region. Ultimately, the Gulf War set the stage for a new era in the Middle East. The conflict's destruction, the ongoing U.S. presence, and the rise of radical groups like al-Qaeda reshaped regional and global security dynamics. The war illustrated how military interventions, foreign occupation, and unresolved grievances could combine to produce a new generation of threats, leaving a legacy that continues to influence the Middle East and global politics well into the 21st century. Chapter 29: The 9/11 Attacks and the Global War on Terror. The events of September 11th, 2001 irrevocably transformed the world. On that day, 19 members of al-Qaeda hijacked 4 commercial airplanes. 2 planes were flown into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City. 1 struck the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia. And the 4th, United Airlines Flight 93, crashed into a field in Pennsylvania after passengers attempted to retake control. Nearly 3,000 people from over 90 countries were killed, marking the deadliest terrorist attack in history. The sheer scale and audacity of the attacks, coupled with the immediacy of live media coverage, shocked the global community and revealed the vulnerabilities of even the most powerful nations. For al-Qaeda, led by Osama bin Laden, the attacks were the culmination of years of planning, ideological development, and anti-Western sentiment. Bin Laden viewed the United States as the primary obstacle to the establishment of a global Islamic order. The attacks were intended not only to inflict mass casualties, but also to provoke a response that would draw the U.S. into prolonged conflicts in the Muslim world, a strategy designed to radicalize and mobilize Muslims worldwide. Al-Qaeda framed the attacks as a defense of Islam against Western imperialism, seeking to ignite a broader clash between the Islamic world and the West. The U.S. response was immediate and far-reaching. President George W. Bush declared a war on terror, signaling the start of a global campaign to dismantle terrorist networks and eliminate safe havens for extremist groups. The central focus was al-Qaeda, but the effort also targeted the Taliban regime in Afghanistan, which had provided sanctuary to bin Laden and his followers. On October 7, 2001, the U.S.-led coalition launched Operation Enduring Freedom, quickly toppling the Taliban and dispersing al-Qaeda's leadership. Despite these military successes, al-Qaeda remained resilient, continuing to plan and inspire attacks worldwide. The war on terror rapidly expanded beyond Afghanistan. The United States, with support from coalition partners, undertook counterterrorism operations globally, targeting al-Qaeda cells and affiliates. In 2003, the U.S. invaded Iraq, citing Saddam Hussein's alleged ties to terrorism and the threat posed by weapons of mass destruction, WMDs. While the initial invasion swiftly dismantled Hussein's regime, the ensuing occupation triggered widespread insurgency, sectarian violence, and the emergence of new extremist groups, most notably the Islamic State, ISIS. Iraq became a proving ground for insurgency tactics and a base for jihadist recruitment, further complicating the global war on terror. The 9/11 attacks also led to significant domestic changes in the United States. The Department of Homeland Security, DHS, was established in 2002, consolidating multiple federal agencies to prevent future attacks. Aviation security was drastically overhauled. Surveillance and intelligence gathering powers were expanded, and counterterrorism measures became a central component of national policy. The Patriot Act, passed shortly after the attacks, granted broad powers to law enforcement agencies, sparking ongoing debates over the balance between civil liberties and national security. A key element of the U.S. counterterrorism strategy was the use of drone strikes, which allowed targeted operations against terrorist leaders with minimal risk to American personnel. While effective in eliminating high-value targets, drone campaigns raised ethical and legal questions, particularly regarding civilian casualties and sovereignty violations. These operations reflected the evolution of warfare in the 21st century, blending intelligence, technology, and remote military action. Despite the killing of bin Laden in Pakistan in 2011, Al-Qaeda's ideology continued to inspire militant groups globally. The rise of ISIS in Iraq and Syria further illustrated the persistence of extremist networks, highlighting that military victories alone could not eradicate the conditions fostering terrorism. The war on terror evolved into a complex, multi-dimensional conflict encompassing military campaigns, intelligence operations, counter-radicalization programs, and international cooperation. The 9/11 attacks and the subsequent war on terror reshaped global geopolitics. They redefined U.S. foreign policy, influenced military strategies worldwide, and altered international norms regarding intervention, counterterrorism, and security. The conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq demonstrated both the capabilities and limitations of conventional military power in addressing ideological threats. Furthermore, the attacks highlighted the vulnerabilities of open societies in an era of transnational terrorism. Ultimately, 9/11 marked the beginning of a new era of global conflict. The war on terror, though successful in degrading terrorist networks, exposed complex challenges, including state failure, radicalization, and the unintended consequences of foreign intervention. The legacy of 9/11 continues to shape security policies, international relations, and societal attitudes toward terrorism. As the world adapts to an evolving threat landscape, the lessons of 9/11 remain a crucial guide for understanding the interplay between ideology, violence, and global security. The events of September 11, 2001, and the ensuing global response underscore that terrorism is not merely a tactical problem, but a strategic, ideological, and social challenge. The attacks left an indelible mark on the United States and the world, shaping the first decades of the 21st century and influencing the trajectory of conflicts, security policies, and international relations for generations to come. Chapter 30: The Rise of Globalization and the Shifting Balance of Power. The events of 9/11 and the subsequent war on terror profoundly reshaped geopolitics, economics, and security. Yet alongside these challenges, the early 21st century saw the rise of another powerful force: globalization. Nations became increasingly interconnected through trade, technology, and communication, ushering in a new era of economic, cultural, and political integration. This period also brought challenges, including rising economic inequality, the redefinition of global power structures, and emerging geopolitical tensions. In the wake of the Cold War and the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the 1990s had been marked by relative stability. The United States emerged as the world's sole superpower, with liberal democracy and capitalism seen as dominant global systems. Free markets and the spread of democratic values were regarded as cornerstones of this new global order. Yet 9/11 shattered this sense of stability, exposing vulnerabilities in the global system and prompting a reevaluation of the balance of power. The War on Terror, while focused on military operations, had far-reaching economic and political consequences. Massive U.S. military spending reshaped international alliances as countries that had once been Cold War adversaries found themselves cooperating against terrorism. Simultaneously, new economic powers began to rise, signaling a shift in global power dynamics. China, in particular, emerged as a key player. Rapid economic growth, driven by market reforms and integration into global trade, propelled China to the status of the world's second-largest economy. Its rise challenged U.S. and European dominance, as economic success was accompanied by growing political and military influence. China's 2001 entry into the World Trade Organization further integrated it into the global economy. It became the world's manufacturing hub, supplying goods ranging from electronics to textiles. While Western companies benefited from lower production costs, millions of jobs were lost in developed nations, fueling economic inequality and political discontent. Other emerging markets, such as India, Brazil, and South Africa, also experienced significant growth, expanding influence in global trade and finance. These countries became key drivers of economic growth, challenging U.S. and European dominance and demanding a larger role in international institutions like the UN, IMF, and World Bank. The digital revolution further transformed the global economy. The internet, mobile technology, and new digital platforms altered communication, business, and daily life. Companies like Apple, Google, and Microsoft became economic powerhouses, driving innovation and shaping work, communication, and entertainment. Social media platforms enabled instant information sharing, activism, and political mobilization, but also gave rise to misinformation, manipulation, and cyber threats. The 2008 global financial crisis exposed vulnerabilities in the interconnected global economy. Triggered by the U.S. housing collapse, it rapidly spread worldwide, prompting unprecedented government interventions. The crisis revealed the dangers of financial deregulation, multinational corporate power, and excessive debt. It also highlighted the uneven benefits of globalization, with some countries and populations left behind. Globalization continued to reshape the world, creating opportunities and risks. Trade, finance, and information flowed freely across borders, but the benefits were uneven, contributing to rising inequality and social unrest. This dissatisfaction fueled political polarization and populist movements. In the United States, Donald Trump's 2016 election signaled a rejection of post-Cold War globalism, emphasizing nationalism and protectionism. In Europe, Brexit reflected similar desires to reclaim sovereignty. The future of globalization is uncertain. Technological advancement and interdependence continue, yet nationalism, protectionism, and geopolitical tensions challenge the global order. As new powers rise and old alliances are tested, the balance of power remains fluid. The legacy of the 21st century, marked by globalization, technological innovation, economic upheaval, and geopolitical shifts, will depend on how nations and individuals adapt. Cooperation, resilience, and strategic foresight will be crucial in navigating these complex forces, shaping the course of an increasingly interconnected and unpredictable world.